we're live. I'm here with Kacadia. How do you say it again?
𝕮𝖊𝖆𝖆. We'll get it one day.
One day, 𝕮𝖊𝖆𝖆. Okay, Baz. I'm here with Baz. We're going to talk about English history again.
All of it.
All of it. Because I've been going through the rest is history with Tom Holland and Dominic Sandbrook, which is a very fun history podcast. And the reason it's fun is because they're both British. And so whenever they talk about the War of the Roses or the Battle of Azincourt, the British patriotism that comes out of them against the French is just so fun.
I actually really like that podcast, and that can get some people riled up because Tom Holland, he's not like woke, but he's not exactly anti-establishment. He's firmly within academia and he's comfortable being in academia. And
he's an odd figure to me.
He really is. He's also, do you know about his book Millennium?
No, I've only read Dominion.
Well, Dominion is good too, but I started but haven't finished Millennium, and it's wait, maybe I'm getting confused. No, sorry, I am thinking of Dominion. That's the one we're looking at the development of the Western thought, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Pretty much.
So you can tell from that he's like incredibly sympathetic to Christianity and Catholicism, but isn't himself. So that already puts him in a precarious position. But I think he's like the only pop historian that you can get really, really good history from. There's people like Dan Snow, who's just a complete fuckwit, who's more successful than Tom Holland. But like, if you read or watch or listen to anything from Tom Holland, I think you'll get good history. And I don't see a need to ask for much more than that in a historian, especially not one who's successful.
The reason I like him is he debated A.C. Grayling on Unbelievable about how Christianity gave us everything, gave us the, and he's debating a philosopher, and the philosopher that Christians destroyed class orders. The monks translated everything you believe in. Yeah. Like he just won't let a point drop and just hammers the guy over the head with it, and it's brutal. And like he's such a nice guy and such like a twink look build that when he's hammering this old philosopher, this over the head with facts, it's really good.
Awesome. Okay, that's great.
Yeah, give me a second. I accidentally opened I opened the stream up on YouTube and had heard my own voice.
Oh yeah, I've done that many a time.
Yeah, but the first, real quick, before we get into this, I asked ChatGPT to explain all of English history like I'm 5. So I want to read it to you. It's in 8 points, and then we'll see what you think of it.
That's quite condensed. Let's see how that goes.
A really, really short story of England. Long, long ago, England wasn't even called England yet. There were people living on the land, but it was mostly wild. Then people called the Romans came and built roads and towns. 2. The Saxons and the Vikings. After the Romans left, different groups moved in. The Saxons came from faraway land and made little kingdoms, but then scary Vikings with big boats came and tried to take over. There was a brave king named Alfred who stopped them. 1066, the big battle. This is a super important year because a man named William from France fought in a big battle called the Battle of Hastings. He won, but that's when England stopped having kings and queens we still talk about today. That's when England started having kings and queens we talk about today. Kings and queens. After William, there were a lot of kings and queens. Some are good, some are not so good. There was one queen named Elizabeth who never got married but made England very powerful. The English Civil War. People didn't always agree with the king, and one day they decided they didn't want him to be king anymore. There was a war for a while. There was no king, but then they decided they like having kings again after all.
True.
The Industrial Revolution. A long time later, people in England started building lots of machines and factories. This changed the world and made England super rich.
Yeah.
England helped fight in 2 really big wars called World War I and World War II. Lots of countries were involved, but in the end, England was one of the winners. Today, now England has a royal family people love to talk about, and the country is run by a government that people vote for.
Right. That sounds remarkably similar to something called BBC Bite Size, which I used in school when I was like 13 years old, and it's just, just condensed history for young teens. It's not far off. I did chuckle starting the history though with just like, there might have been a few people around, and then the Romans came. That I found funny, but
yeah, the few people who did Stonehenge.
Well,
right,
yeah,
Stonehenge before or after the Romans. I don't know the timeline of that.
Way before, but
I figured it was before. Stonehenge has always been fascinating to me because I'm like, Why?
Oh, just you wait. I can tell you more stuff that's fascinating.
Fantastic. And then one more opening question. Well, let's do two more opening questions before we get into it. One. Where's it at here? Do the Scots deserve to live? If yes, at what cost?
Bulge asked this question, didn't he?
He did.
Yes, the Scots are a wonderful, noble people, and I wish that they could be independent from Britain like they wanted to be until they voted against it at the last minute, just so I don't have to keep listening to them whinge about how much they want to be independent. For goodness sake, just let them go, because I'm sick of hearing about it. But I do very much love the Scottish people and their history.
And last opening question. If Henry V had lived for 5 more years, would all of France be speaking English?
I tell you what, I don't know much about the end of Henry V's life, so I'm not sure. I feel like he from memory, I think he stopped campaigning in France a good few years before he died. So I don't think stretching those years out would have changed it. But I could be wrong.
I guess I was reading about him, and dude's awesome. The way he took an arrow to the cheek and was like, "I'm fine. I'm going to keep fighting."
He was definitely the greatest warrior king of a united England.
It's reading more about English history. I love how some of the best kings are just chads who like have their buddies and they go, "No, what? Let's go to a carnival. Let's go to a tournament and let's go invade France because why not?" Yep. Like the start of the 100 Years' War, he's like this 26-year-old king's like, "Yeah, I'm the coolest guy around and my boys are awesome. We're gonna go just invade France and take it all."
Yep, and then all of the king's like sons and cousins and everything were all the same way. It was just like rugby lads on tour and leaving a wake of bloodshed behind them.
I love it. I love that there's the trend in English history of these like you said, rugby players. So it's like, no, we're kings and rugby, we're great lads, and we're gonna go, kill some people, and it's gonna be great.
But it's all right because the people you're killing have agreed to have the scrap, and they just ended up losing. So that's their own fault.
And I've been reading Sir Nigel from what's his name?
Oh, so good, Arthur Conan Doyle.
Arthur Conan Doyle, yeah. Oh, it's incredible.
It's unbelievable. Yeah, definitely, and the sequel as well.
And the fact that he hated Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
Wanted this one to be.
Wishes everyone to read that instead.
Yeah, that's great. I honestly, I'm not a huge fan of Sherlock Holmes. I think the Father Brown mysteries are better if you want English mysteries. But I understand why Sherlock is so popular. He's why we have Batman. So I get it.
Yeah, true.
But anyway, let's get into this. So where do you want to begin? Where do you start your history?
So, well, I also cheated a little bit and used ChatGPT to just to outline the eras. And there's two of them that I've massively expanded on because I thought those would be the ones you're most interested in, which is the Anglo-Saxon hegemony period and early medieval period, which we've discussed with things like the 100 Years' War, Henry V. Some would call it late medieval, but post-Norman, pre-Tudor. So there's going to be a lot that I miss out. Like there's going to be lots of people who say, "Why don't you talk about Robert Peel and the Corn Laws when we get to like the early Victorian period?" But like that's just, if we wanted to include every single little thing, it wouldn't be possible. So there's going to be lots of stuff that maybe you or other people would have liked to hear more in depth that I just can't do. And I've picked and choose where to layer on the context. And yeah, it could be hit or miss. There's only one way to find out. But we're going to start with prehistory, which almost sounds funny, but the earliest recorded human habitation in England goes to the Mesolithic era, which is around about 8,000 BC, so 10,000 years ago. I'm certainly not an expert in this area, whereas you get the people who look at the migratory patterns of haplogroups and language families. That's not me. I have been to plenty of museums that go into great deal on the kind of societies determined by the way they buried their dead and the kind of wares that they used, and it's fascinating. Like to look at your own ancestors 10,000 years ago and how they lived is just wild, and it's something you can just go down the road and do.
That is why, because as an American, we don't have that.
Yeah.
Because it's an American mutt like myself, there's no way you get.
Actually, sorry. Before I got going, I was meant to ask, like, what is your heritage? Do you have an interest because you've got some English in you or not?
I have no idea. I asked both grandparents on both sides. No one knows. I look very much. There's a Swedish guy who looks like a twin of mine, and so I'm gonna guess Swedish because I look like there are several Swedish people I look like.
Right.
So based purely on aesthetic and my love of code, I'm gonna go Sweden. But I really had no idea.
Right. Okay. Well, Sweden and England don't have much history together because it wasn't even the Swedes who were the Vikings coming over. That was the Danes. But we'll get to them.
Big disappointment for me. I'm like, oh, Swedes like Vikings? No, just the trading Vikings. Damn it.
Well, do you know that the Swedes are basically the 𝕮𝖆𝖉𝖆𝖆, the first Russian state, were Swedish Vikings that went down all the rivers down there.
I think the only cool thing the Swedes have done was the 𝕮𝖉𝖆𝖆 god for the Byzantine Empire.
Oh, not just that. They had their own bona fide empire in like the Georgian era in the 1700s.
Yeah, was Gustav or something?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
He went insane after getting the dog from that Baron Napoleon killed. It was my favorite little historical anecdote. This dog was, some Baron's dog, some duke's dog. Napoleon executed the duke, and the dog went to this king, and then the king went insane, and no one knows what happened to the dog. I love that little, like, we can track the dogs like that one, and then the goat who went with Captain Cook around to Australia. The goat who that goat circumnavigated the globe. That was like the biggest, that was the most well-traveled goat in history. It's just kind of incredible.
Yeah, that was a period where European people were just kind of just having fun with it.
Incredible.
Okay, so with the Mesolithic era and the arrival of the first Homo sapiens to Britain, after that there was the Neolithic era, where things start to get more advanced in terms of tool usage and civilizational structures, and including Stonehenge, which you've already alluded to, which is possibly the oldest fixed monument / site in the country, and that the building around that has been dated to around 3000 BC. And there is also the 𝕉𝖉𝖆𝖆 stone circles. So Stonehenge and 𝕉𝖉𝖆𝖆 are in a county called Wiltshire.
How do you spell the second one?
𝕉𝖉𝖆𝖆, 𝕉𝖉𝖆𝖆. And so Wiltshire is a funny place. It's a very small county known for just having country bumpkins that don't know how to read or write, and not much else going on. But it's been so crucial throughout all of English history, starting right at the very beginning of how much we can truly trace. So there's lots of theories about what Stonehenge was built for, and a lot of them do come down to constellations and reading the stars and solar, not the equinox, what's the other one, like the height of summer? Solstice. During the solstice, the sun lines up between the particular pillars, and it makes a lot of sense. Well, what we know about basically all Neolithic civilizations is the movement of the stars and the celestial bodies were incredibly important to them in some particular way, potentially religious or potentially cultural or scientific. And Stonehenge is right at the start of that. I'm sure 𝕉𝖉𝖆𝖆 is too, but 𝕉𝖉𝖆𝖆 is pretty incredible because this was built around 2800 BC. It's not far from Stonehenge. I went to 𝕉𝖉𝖆𝖆 a couple months ago. Me and my friends walked from 𝕉𝖉𝖆𝖆 down an ancient Anglo-Saxon road called the Ridgeway to past a bunch of long barrows, which are these Neolithic burial grounds that are just they've been excavated and opened, and you can go inside them and there's no bodies or anything, but it's a stone structure on a hill. They're all around the countryside. There are things called tumuli, which are man-made mounds, normally on hills, and they are basically just giant tombs. This is part of Anglo-Saxon history, but did you know about the Sutton Hoo helmet? It's the very famous helmet from the Anglo-Saxon period.
I do not.
Okay, if you look up Anglo-Saxon helmet, you'll see it. It's it's a helmet that comes down to a face with a little mustache. But that was that was a burial ship, a massive boat that some sort of like Anglo-Saxon nobility was buried in the ground. And in the 1930s, some woman on her farm, which she inherited once her husband died, decided to get like a local amateur archaeologist to have a look at these mounds on her farm. And they went, oh, it's a giant Anglo-Saxon ship with like the most well-preserved clothes and ornaments from the period we've ever found.
Wow.
And this was just some woman in Suffolk, which is again another countryside county in the east. And there are so many of these like just burial mounds all over the country that we've not even bothered looking at yet. And if one random one on some lady's farm has the best preserved Anglo-Saxon pieces of the time, the amount of history still not uncovered in this country is insane. And you can just walk past them. If you walk along this ridgeway, you just go, yeah, there's a field with 5 tumuli in it, which could be burial mounds from the Anglo-Saxon to the Neolithic period. They're all over the place.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
Real quick, I got a question. I got a question on Stonehenge, real quick.
Yeah.
What's the early? Do you know, like, so when the Romans came over, did they have any idea about it? Like, they write about it? Like, a lot of people have gone to the British Isles before. Did anyone before? Like, when's the earliest account people like writing about? Don't know. When's the earliest account we have people writing about Stonehenge, not knowing what it's for?
Like, do you know Stonehenge? I'm not entirely sure, and that's a really good question. I'd love to know if at the time when the Romans first started properly occupying Britain, if like the Druidic Celtic culture was still using them in a spiritual fashion. I imagine they were, but I think a lot of basically everything they can carbon date of the structure is from the Neolithic period. I think. I don't think there's any sort of like they found burial tombs and like stashes of valuables around Stonehenge, but I think they're all quite a bit older than the Roman period. So with Stonehenge, I'm not particularly sure, but the Romans certainly had their own thoughts about the islands before and after they got here.
Mock people who are too stupid to learn to read or something.
Probably, yeah. But I don't know. You can read everything that the Romans ever said about the people they contacted, and they inherited from the Greeks the absolute disdain of everyone who didn't speak their language. But so we can kind of fast forward from there, then from the Neolithic period through the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. But that's when you start to get the proper development of the Celtic culture in Britain that we end up knowing so much about, because it's the culture that the Romans encountered and wrote down so much about. You can also, more of these things that you can find so much of is the Iron Age around about 600 BC. So again, this is already 2,000 years or so after. Sorry, just a point to note as well. So Stonehenge built 3000 BC, 𝕉𝖉𝖆 2800 BC. The Great Pyramid of Giza started construction in 2550 BC. So Stonehenge is 500 years older than the pyramids in Egypt.
Wow.
So it's insane. And the last thing about Stonehenge as well, nobody has any idea how people got those stones there. They're huge, enormous things that weigh tons and tons and tons. And like I think one of the most, I think will show how mysterious it is to how they possibly got it there. One of the most regarded theories, because we can confirm that they came from the south of Wales. So this is hundreds of miles away. And one of the most accepted theories is that they just somehow managed to get these giant stones quarried out somehow in Wales, transported them to a river, and floated them down rivers until they got close enough to where Stonehenge is, that somehow they then pulled them out of the river, no idea how they did that, and then transported them over land miles and miles, no idea how they did that.
I saw a History Channel documentary once when I was like 12 or something on this. And the way they see it, they had these logs. They basically had them. Yes. The logs were like here, and they just put them on top, and they rode the logs, and they'd move one log back to the front, and they had to keep doing that number as they rode it across these logs. And if someone got caught in the log, there was no way to get them out, so you had to just kind of keep going and try to put them out of the misery. And he'd be screaming and crying as people are just like, "Sorry, buddy." you got stuck. Nothing we could do. And I just had to slowly push the stone over him. I'm like, that is something I've never been out of America. I've never been to Stonehenge, but I can't imagine seeing something that old in person. You know?
Well, you have to come over, and
eventually I want to.
So the thing about when you go to visit Stonehenge as well, it costs a bomb to go and see it. I think it's something like it might be like £40 per person, so about $60, I think. And there is a fantastic museum there, and actually I've met the man who was in charge of making this museum because his wife sings in a choir with my wife. So that's an amazing thing about being in the southwest and near Stonehenge. Is like, he's the guy who did like all the research and the planning of the museum. So the place to go is 𝕉𝖆𝖉𝖆 because it is 200 years younger than Stonehenge, which in the grand scheme of it, not much. And Stonehenge is like sectioned off. I think when I was a kid, I don't think it was. Maybe you could walk up to it. Right now, they only let the hippies go and touch it during the summer solstice because they say it's for religious purposes, which is bullshit.
The more you tell me about Stonehenge, the angrier I'm getting about those just up oil people who I saw spray painting the Stonehenge.
They wouldn't do it to the pyramids of Giza, and these are older.
Even though the pyramid of Giza were also built by white people, you know.
Yeah, true. Let's go there. So, well, with 𝕉𝖆𝖉𝖆𝖆, 𝕉𝖆𝖉𝖆 was more like a long set of stones that wind around this what's now an amazingly beautiful village. It looks like it's not been touched since the Second World War. It's actually fantastic, and it's like a winding pattern that looks kind of like a snake. So these stones just go all over the hills around the area, and you can just walk up and touch all of them. It's an amazing thing to do. And the thing as well with the transporting the stones to Stonehenge, like that log thing, it's a nice theory, but it doesn't really account for hills, and there's a lot of those around. And Stonehenge itself, it's a very interesting location. It's in a completely flat field that almost looks surrounded by hills, like 360 degrees round, and the density of these tumuli burial grounds on top of those hills is crazy. It's just covered with it. The thought being that powerful people would have themselves buried there so that their body or their spirit or something can see Stonehenge forever from the top of these hills that surround it. So it's an amazing thing to think about, but also it just kind of proves the point again. This is a very hilly area, and trying to push these stones up some logs up a hill and then stop it going out of control going down a hill, again, it's still I don't think it puts all the pieces together. It's an amazing mystery that we genuinely will never know. So after all of that, and the Iron Age is when things get a lot more interesting. That's when the Druidic culture involving human sacrifice, which the Romans took issue with, started around that time. And that's another age where there's lots of things dotted around, because in Wiltshire, again, this very unassuming county, the capital city of the county is Salisbury, an incredibly important city throughout, especially the medieval period. And Salisbury Cathedral was built on a hill called 𝕮𝖆𝖆𝖆𝖆, which in itself is an Iron Age hill fort. And in the Iron Age and this Celtic culture leading up to when the Romans came, the dominant military force was the chariot. And because of that, like, fighting in the open became non-existent. If they ever did, it was chariot versus chariot, and it was more like a duel. And these hill forts, like, which you can imagine what they are, they're just a fortified hill, became essentially like the first castles, probably potentially in all of Europe, but certainly in Britain. And Old Sarum, this hill that Salisbury Cathedral was built on, I think in the 1300s, they literally took down the entire cathedral brick by brick and rebuilt it in the center of the city. And so now you can go see an Iron Age hill fort and the foundations of one of the country's most important cathedrals. And I don't know how old this hill fort is, but it's before the time of the Romans. And there's plenty of them around. Most of them aren't tourist areas at all. You can just look on a map. An OS map is like the professional sort of maps that you use for hiking and stuff, and just go, oh, there's an Iron Age hill fort. Let's go look at that today. All over the place. And
I gotta go to England and do a walking tour. That'd be such a fun time.
Whenever anyone comes to England, where do they go? London. Where should they go? Wiltshire. You see all the countryside, and you see prehistoric history all the way up to medieval history and beyond. It's a truly incredible place.
I have to go to Suffolk, just where Belloc's from. So I got to go.
Yes. Well, have I told you about Sussex before? Because I lived there for a few years and lived in the big city there, Brighton, which is known as being the gay capital of the country. But it's actually quite a nice place. And the thing I say about it is the homeless drug addicts are much more noticeable than any of the pride parades or any of the degeneracy that goes on, at least if you stay on the right side of the city. That's its big problem. But okay, so from the Iron Age up until just before around about the time of the Romans, I want to talk about the legends involving Saint Joseph of Arimathea. He was Yeah, oh, really? So I believe all this because it's so cool, not because there's any particular evidence.
Same.
So to go over that, Saint Joseph of Arimathea was a secret disciple of Jesus written about in the Gospels. He was a Sanhedrin member and was described as a very wealthy man. And I think this kind of just comes through like oral history, that his wealth came through the trade, like global trade of metals. And from all the way from the ancient times up until the Georgian and early Victorian era, so like 200 years ago, the southwest coast of Britain was the most important exporter of tin in the entire world. And tin was incredibly important for like domestic metalwork. Like, yeah, it's not strong like iron, but for the sake of building materials and utility tools and stuff like that, tin is incredibly important. And there was no more dense place of it than Cornwall on the southwest coast. And a lot of people like to try and say that during Jesus Christ's adolescent years, when the gospel doesn't say anything about him, we only get his time from being a child and his 3 days in the temple as like a very young adolescent up until he's about 30. So people wonder, what did he do in this time? And it is theorized that Saint Joseph of Arimathea was a close friend of the family and might have taken our Lord under his wing and showed him the ropes of the metal trading business, which I think there might be some sort of like tangential evidence for this, but it's believed by based people that Saint Joseph of Arimathea took Jesus at least up to there's a certain island, I can't remember what it's called. It's a very small island just off the coast of Cornwall, where like a lot of the international shipping of tin at this time would be done from. Like that was where the trading dock is. And this sort of inspires an incredibly popular hymn in England called Jerusalem. I can't remember the name of the man who wrote it now, but he wrote it in the Victorian period as like a coming together of English folk myth about Christ's potential visit to these isles. And it's an amazing hymn. It's sung at like all the royal events, like all the weddings, I think. And it was at my wedding because it's based, and also my friend's wedding because he's based. And it talks about did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green. And what's also funny as well, lots of sola scriptura strict adherent Protestants lose their shit over this hymn and say, no, because it doesn't say in the Bible that Jesus came to England, you cannot possibly believe that he did. Even if you say, well, there might be some sort of a tangible link here, they'll say, no, not in the Bible. We can't believe it at all. Lame. Terrible hymn. Can't sing it.
Lame faggot losers.
Basically. And so after Christ's earthly ministry, again, this is something that might be more medieval legend. It's believed that Saint Joseph of Arimathea preached in Britain. He came here to spread the gospel, a lot like how Doubting Thomas went the other way towards India. Like the apostles went a really far distance, and it is not inconceivable at all to think that if it's true that Saint Joseph of Arimathea had his wealth through metal trading and had connections with England, that he would have came here. And again, another thing, I think it's more folk legend than evidence-based, but it's believed that Glastonbury in Somerset, which borders Wiltshire, so again, we're still in the same sort of area, is where he had his base of operations. And you also had Glastonbury Abbey, which was one of the most magnificent in the country until, you know what. And you can still go see the ruins of Glastonbury Abbey, and even as ruins, it's an amazing thing to behold.
That's something we'll have to touch on a bit, is the absolute tragedy of the things lost during the Reformation.
And
Like
I've got a particular statistic about that I think will really, hammer the stake in the heart.
I keep thinking of St. Thomas Becket, how great his story is, and how much I found out about only like 2 weeks ago. I'm like, this guy is incredible, and the fact that his incredible story is barely known today is just a tragedy.
I would say it is certainly still known among a lot of English people, and especially English Catholics, because it's a reason to shake your fist at the monarchy, essentially. But the Anglicans also do venerate him because it was before the Reformation, which is you kind of think, well, there's no logical reason why they couldn't, but it doesn't really fit.
It doesn't jive.
Yeah. So okay. The first, after the Iron Age, the first time that the Romans officially landed, hold on, sorry, let me just check I got my, no, this is right. Julius Caesar was the first Roman leader to set foot on the south coast. He had two expeditions which basically failed, but after his conquest of Gaul, he did his typical legal justifications, which you had to do as a Roman aristocrat, to say, no, the Britons, with all of their wealth from the tin trade, have been supporting the Gauls against the Roman interests. So I have to go over there and try and sort them out myself. And so he did. They crossed the English Channel, and the perception of the Romans at the time of Britain is it's so cool to think about. And that my brother, he did history at university, and he has such a deep love for this country, and especially the myths of the land and the folk tales. He said something that I thought was absolutely just beautiful. He said he stood on the Black Mountains in the south of Wales, and if you look out into the mist, you can see the dragons. And I know he didn't mean it literally, but I thought, you know what, there's some bloody truth in that. That, like, if you take a second to sit somewhere truly ancient in this land and just sit there, you feel it. You feel the just history in the soil and what people have believed and the tales they've told to explain history and their own existence, and like these mythical stories come to life. But that is what the Romans really viewed, in a literal sense, Britain as. They viewed it as a land of like giant beasts, constantly covered in fog, and these beasts would emerge out of the fog constantly and take people away, and it was incredibly dangerous, and it was full of wizards, and it kind of was because of the Druids. And the Roman perception of Britain before they got here was just they were absolutely terrified of it. They thought it was the furthest removed place from Earth that you could actually set foot. And what is very interesting as well, I can't remember which. You go.
That's one thing I find very interesting about England's place in European history in the early days is that it is the edge of the world, in a sense.
Yeah.
Like, as far as you can go in Roman Empire, as far as you can go in Europe, but it looks out to the coast, but you don't know what's past the ocean. It is the edge of the known world, and that feeling of ice, because it's an archipelago of like what, several, this main island and this island. It's just that sense of wonder, despair, and monsters that come from the landscape, the distance, how it's far away from the center of this of everything going on in Europe, but it's also the edge of the known world. Like, there's so many cool things about that mindset towards England that I think led to the carrying on of so many cool little myths and traditions.
Yes, and the geography of this island is so fascinating to think about. Like it's the prime reason why the Vikings came here, because it is such a. I think of John of Gaunt's speech in Shakespeare's Richard III, which is this blessed plot, this realm, this land, this England, untouched by the something of disease, its own little demi-paradise, that we're European, but also something different. We are sheltered in so many ways. And you can understand from the Romans' perspective as well. Like by this point, they'd stopped all the piracy in the Mediterranean. I think it was Pompey Magnus that stopped that. So Caesar would have had a lot of experience on the very calm, warm, beautiful seas of the Mediterranean. And then if you go to the English Channel, like you would, if your only experience of sailing was the bloody Mediterranean, you went and saw the English Channel, you would think there's no way to get to cross this, and whatever is at the other side is not worth the effort. But he did it. Only Caesar could have done it at that time, of course. But they, for many particular reasons, mostly logistical rather than combat related, these excursions couldn't develop any further until about a century later, under, I think it was Claudius. I'm missing him in my notes here, but I think Claudius was the emperor who saw over the proper first invasion of Britain. I can't remember the exact dates. I probably should have wrote it down. But the most famous sort of conflict of the period of early Roman occupation is Boudicca's rebellion. And at the time, these Celts who did all the things like ride around the chariots, and they had wild, unkempt hair. They all wore trousers though, with like very intricate patterns, which I think is indicative of the extremely successful wool trade that we'd become known for later in the future. They were certainly advanced societies, but they were not organized at all. And so the Romans were able to just pick off one tribe at a time, just like they were able to do with the Gauls and most of the Western Germans. So they had basically full hegemony pretty quickly over the Celtic Briton, as in Briton tribes. But one in particular, I think that I think it's the Iceni tribe. Hold on, sorry, maybe the Iceni were a Gallic tribe. No, that's right. Iceni was this tribe of Boudicca's in the east of England. And I think at the time this happened, she was already the queen of the tribe. I think maybe her husband had passed away. But the Romans, they varied a lot in how cruel their taxes were, essentially, against local people. And they did this all across the empire. And one particular time, they were extremely aggressive in their tax collection. And Boudica either couldn't pay it or refused to pay it. And her village was sacked. Her and all of her daughters were brutally raped by the Roman soldiers. And once the word spread about what happened, like all of the Celtic tribes were just furious and like seeing red and ready to do something about it. And she took up the leadership of this rebellion and stoked the fires of all the Celts. And a massive army was formed. And I should have researched this properly beforehand. I'm pretty sure they started just like streaming down from where they were in the mid-east of England, down towards Colchester in Essex, which at the time was the Roman capital, and then further down into Londinium, aka London, which at the time wasn't the capital, but was quickly becoming extremely important due to its link with the Thames.
I gotta say, the evolution of names is very fun to me in this, because you have Britain spelled differently. Then you had Britannia. Then you had
Yes,
London. You had London. What's he called? It was called
Londinium.
London.
Londinium.
I love that the name stuck. You know, it's just like London, but it was called this, and it goes back all this way. And even when I see I'm reading English history, they're like, "Oh, York." I'm like, "Oh, hey, that's where New York made." Yeah, New York. Okay.
Yeah,
like I didn't know it as American.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the Roman name for York was, but that again, that was a York, Roman city. One of my favorite cities in the country is called Bath, because that's where the Roman baths are. There is only one natural hot spring in the country, and that's in Bath. And of course, the Romans loved it there for that particular reason, loving their communal baths. And they called that city Aquae Sulis. And you can still go to these Roman baths today, and it's unreal. You can drink the mineral water from fountains of this, again, the only hot stream in the country, which made it the sort of the Saint-Tropez of the day for Roman Britain. Is it Eboracum? Sorry, I'm trying. I think Eboracum might have been the name for Roman York. Yeah, Eboracum. That's right. There's another very interesting fact about York to come in a bit. So, Roman. This Boudicca's rebellion got absolutely destroyed. I can't remember where exactly it was, but it was sort of northwest of what at the time was London, but I think now it might just be like Greater London. The way the Celtic rebellion was like destroyed is just like one pitched battle, and basically every single person who attended that battle died. The very few, unless these Celts just simply ran away, they had absolutely no chance. It was literally like a handful of Romans died, and hundreds, if not thousands, of rebelling Britons died. The reason kind of being that the formation the Romans took was extremely disciplined, and it was like if you can imagine like a chainsaw, you've got these like jutting out points and like multiple spearheads all next to each other, and that was the formation the troops took. So when the undisciplined Celts, who are most of them unmounted their chariots, because the thing to do with a chariot is fire a bow and arrow from the back of it, and you try shooting a fully plated Roman soldier with a massive shield, doesn't really do a whole lot. So they kind of gave up with the chariots and just did an undisciplined charge, seeing their advantage in numbers. And what these what this formation essentially did was just funneled all of the Celts into a choke point, and we're talking like 50 choke points along the line, where they could basically just be stabbed by 6 people at once. once they hit the apex of the choke point, and just absolutely annihilated. And after that, I think it was basically just peace and quiet. Like, it just became Roman Britain from that point on. And the native Celtic culture outside of Scotland, which famously Hadrian's Wall was built in the north of England to keep the Scots out, because the Romans just couldn't extend that far, and it was just way too hard to try and fight the Scots in their own terrain. They just built a wall, and that was that. They didn't really do much with Wales, and I think they kind of left Cornwall alone a bit, because despite Cornwall still being so economically important, it was just so sparsely populated that you could never really have like a Cornish uprising. And in those places, the native Celtic culture continued, but basically all of England and all of the Celtic people living there became Romans, essentially. And what's interesting is Tertullian, the first Western father, as he's often viewed as the father of the church, claims he wrote in 220 AD that the Britons had received the gospel and that Christ's name reigns there. So that's very interesting, considering most people think that Britain became Christian in like the 500s after the collapse of the Roman Empire. But no, the Roman Empire itself brought Christianity to the country, and that soon after the crucifixion, it was like 220 AD, and Tertullian describes it as just being a Christian land, which is very interesting to think about. And that all came to a head, though, in 410 AD, when the last of the Roman legions left Britain as the Western Roman Empire collapsed, and had that whole period of history on its own. And what came after that is the Anglo-Saxon period, because between 410 AD to 550 AD, there was just a massive power vacuum from these Roman legions leaving, and the, quite honestly, domesticated Romano Britons, as they're known, not being able to really defend themselves. They were entirely reliant on Rome for their cosmopolitan lives that they now had, and the retreat of the legions was a massive oh shit moment. Now what? The story goes that a man named 𝕮𝖆𝖆𝖆, known as King of the Britons, which is dubious because at this time there was definitely not one King of the Britons, but the story goes he invited two brothers called Hengist and Horsa, who were respectively the leader of the Angles and the Saxons from Germany, to settle on the southeast coast of the country as mercenaries to protect the British Isles from other roving bands of European barbarians, the likes of the Goths, which were running all over the place and sacking Rome itself. There were also the Jutes, which were a tribe from southern Denmark, and these Angles, Saxons, and Jutes had a period of basically mass migration into England after the Romans left, likely themselves being pushed out of their own lands by all of this westward migration that occurred throughout Europe due to the advance of the Huns, pushing basically all the tribes west, because they were just so devastating. And of course, that's what then pushed them into Roman lands and caused the downfall of Rome. So,
real quick,
this story.
Real quick, we just got a first comment from the live chat. This is good stuff.
I'm glad to hear it.
This comes from my sister. So thank you, Savannah.
Oh, nice.
Thank
you.
But
I have just noticed the clock is 47 minutes, and we've only just finished the Roman period. And like I said, yeah.
If you want to do a long stream, if you want to break it up into multiple episodes, I'll leave that one up to you.
I like doing it all at once, but if you at any point want to,
it's Saturday. It's 12 o'clock. I have a bottle of wine. Let's keep going.
What more do you need? So what is also interesting then is this the story of Hengist and Horsa, the leader of the Germanic tribes. Every modern historian has, of course, written that off as just fake, never actually having happened. But one man by the name of I was about to say the initials, John Roald. No, I can't remember. J.R.R. Tolkien, a certain expert on the Anglo-Saxon period, believed it had at least a kernel of truth, with fragmentary evidence calling into question the fact that at least Hengist, one of these two brothers, was a historical figure, because there's I think it's a pottery fragment describing a leader of a recent tribe called Hengest. So close enough to Hengist that Tolkien says, nope, this is true. But what is quite fascinating about this period is, this is, what's known as the Dark Ages. It wasn't exactly dark. The culture didn't go anywhere, but certainly surviving examples of written records are incredibly hard to come by. And they would be again until what we've already alluded to, the monasteries revived the literary tradition of Europe, which at the time it just vanished. But of the little literary and archaeological evidence we have from the period, of this period where these Germanic tribes, which settled on one particular corner of the coast just to serve as mercenaries, ended up becoming the new dominant people of the entire country. That's an unbelievable ethnographic change. The Celts were just basically entirely removed from England. The fact being England comes from the word Angleland, the Anglo-Saxons just became the people of the land almost overnight. And we have no literary or archaeological evidence that there were ever any like great battles that ever occurred. It didn't seem like this was a period of conflict at all. So here's another mystery, a lot like Stonehenge. How did it go from being a Celtic country to a Germanic country with like nobody having it, like no fighting over it? It's a pretty great mystery, and there's lots of people who try and pull pieces together, saying no, this was a peaceful period.
Here's my theory. I gotta say for this one, the Dark Lord, AA talks about Tony Blair, has a time machine built by Jews, and he went back. He went back to time and just slowly phased out. It was a practice run, you see.
Wow. I mean, it's probably not far off.
Let's continue. So, big upheaval change in demographics from the Celtic to the Anglo-Saxons. Mm-hmm. What time? What point? What's the date? What time frame is this?
Between 410 to 550 AD.
Okay.
So immediately after when the Romans leave, and then around about 100, like only 100 years for the Anglo-Saxon hegemony to emerge across what is now modern England. And these Celts were essentially pushed into Wales. And what is interesting is that Wales, they believe, comes from a Proto-Indo-European word of Walas, which means foreigner or stranger. And so essentially the Anglo-Saxons came in, took over the Celts' homeland, and then called them foreigners as they retreated into the valleys of Wales, and Scotland and Cornwall as well. Cornwall still has a very Celtic identity.
So English history, the English history of colonization dates back a long ways.
Yeah, it's how the Anglo-Saxons came to be, was colonization. So it fits.
Incredible.
We were destined for it. I'd love to know how much. Like, I want to do like a DNA test to find out how much am I Celtic or Anglo-Saxon or Norman. I think I'm mostly Anglo-Saxon, or at least half Anglo-Saxon, half Norman. But the Normans were all aristocrats, and I've never had a single aristocratic bone in my body, so I don't know. So after this period, at around about 550 AD, the Anglo-Saxons had essentially settled into a particular order, and this is the period known as the Heptarchy, where you had the 7 kings of England, of kingdoms such as Wessex, Mercia, which I take my name from, and Northumbria. Those are the most important ones, but there was also Essex and Sussex, which was itself a kingdom, meaning as well South Saxons, Essex meaning East Saxons, Wessex meaning West Saxons. So there's the etymology of those counties for you. So it's also a very interesting period, I think, to look at culture, because for the most part, this was a total overthrow of the Celtic hegemony, because there's not a whole lot of synergism between this Germanic culture and the existing Celtic culture. It just, like, if you look at archaeological records, it goes from being Celtic one minute to German the next, with its own very distinct, forms of dress and social hierarchies and things like that. It was also, the Heptarchy was a very interesting period. A lot of people say that the political intrigue of Game of Thrones comes from the War of the Roses period, which is kind of true, but I think you find it more in the Heptarchy, not least because there's multiple kingdoms on this one island. But a lot of the conflicts really come down to just like cynical power politics, for the reasons why these kingdoms fight against each other and how the borders all merge and stuff like that. And all the ones bordering the Celtic kingdoms, such as Mercia, which had Wales on its west, and Northumbria, which had Scotland to the north, spent a hell of a lot of time fighting the Celts on their border. but never really moving the borders, which I find interesting because it's the same sort of like quagmire that the Romans got bogged down in. The Romans couldn't really push into Wales, they couldn't really push into Scotland, and neither could the Anglo-Saxons. And that's why Celtic culture persisted there for so long, and well, people themselves. And at this time of the mid-6th century, this is when people like to say England became Christian, because we've already established that the Romano-Britons were basically fully Christian, but these Anglo-Saxons were Germanic pagans. And it seems like the missionary work from these Christian Celts within the Anglo-Saxon people was very minimal, and you can understand why. If they've been like entirely relocated, desolate, and having to start again, they've probably got to spend more time focusing on themselves than this new group of pagans that have come in. So noticing this, Saint Gregory the Great himself, Gregory I, ordered a massive mission. Actually, here's the interest. Do you know about the story of Gregory seeing the first English people he ever saw?
I do not.
It's a famous quote among English Catholics in particular, which is non angeli sed angelus, which is supposedly he saw some English children at a market in Rome, and saw that they were just like basically the most beautiful, angelic looking people he'd ever seen in his life, and said, "Who are they?" And they said, "These are the Angles." And he said, "They're not Angles, they're angels." And after that, he ordered Saint Augustine of Canterbury, as he came to be known, not to be confused of obviously Augustine of Hippo, who arrived in Kent in 597 AD and established the first Christian church amongst the Anglo-Saxons and converted multiple kings. And with that, the kings then end up basically all the entire people under their charge end up being baptized. And I make that point because I ask, what are our bishops doing today? Are they evangelizing the powerful, considering that they are the powerful in the church's hierarchy? No, they're not. And why? Because it works. Once these bishops converted the English kings, then all of the people of their tribe became Christian. And why do we keep looking at having secular rulers and secular countries and wondering, how do we sort this out? I think there's a very clear answer there.
That converting the kings is a winning strategy. I mean, even Saint Xavier, the one who went to Japan, he immediately went to the Shogun and was like, "You're gonna convert and help me convert all your people." And the guy's like, "Okay."
Yeah, like, we're not Methodists. Why do we think that we need to, the top of our clergy need to proselytize the lowest people in the social hierarchy? So we have lower people in our own hierarchy who can look after that part of the secular hierarchy. If you're at the top, why aren't you evangelizing the top of the secular hierarchies? It's,
because hierarchies are bad, dude. We can't have hierarchies. We're all equals, man. And he's just the first among equals.
Yeah, and we'll keep losing ground with a losing strategy and never change anything. But okay, the Anglo-Saxons, for the time that they settled in England, they were not pagan for long at all. They did have their own deities, like the Anglo-Saxon version of Odin was called Woden, and I think Thunar was this isn't funny because they shared the same language as the Norse.
I don't know what you said. Woden. I'm like, I don't know. It's kind of funny. I'm drinking Odin Skull wine right now.
Of course you are. Yeah.
Odin Skull. So I found that a little funny.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, because they were Germanic, they were Norse pagans, much the same way that the Vikings were, and they basically just held the same religion, the same myths, but not for very long. It wasn't long at all that they settled in England as pagans before they became Christian, and this is when Anglo-Saxon culture reaches a zenith, and it's so fascinating and beautiful. We know little about the Anglo-Saxons compared to how much we would know if the Reformation didn't happen. But what we do know about the Christian period of the Anglo-Saxons is amazing. At least after their evangelization, they became a people of like almost unrivaled chivalry, nobility, poetry. Obviously, with this Beowulf, like the oldest existing Old English text came from this period, and we don't even know who wrote it, which can lead you to believe there was so much amazing epics and what's the kind of poetry it is called? The same as like the Iliad, prose. That's it. The English at this time were masters of prose.
And what year was this? What time period?
Now we're talking 550 to 650 AD as this culture starts to emerge.
See, that's interesting because when you're reading about like the 100 Years' War or something, right? It's France is known for being like the home of the chivalry and the stories and the poetry and stuff. But what you're saying is England had it way before.
Not necessarily, because you did have the Carolingian Renaissance with Charlemagne around about this same time, I think it was, and they did reach greater heights because Charlemagne was able to organize these people way more effectively.
Probably the greatest of the great men. Charlemagne.
Probably. See, like, when you look at what he did, it's unreal. Yeah, it beggars belief.
And not a saint.
Is he not? No. Well, no. Alfred the Great isn't either, but he's another amazingly great man to come out of this era. So there is a lot that remains of this time, including the Lindisfarne Gospels. So this is when the amazing tradition of monasteries in England really began, and the Anglo-Saxon saints are just a wonder in and of themselves. Like, if you were to buy a book that detailed every Anglo-Saxon saint and what they did, it'd be enormous. There's people like Saint Swithin, Saint Crispin, the most famous probably the Venerable Bede, who wrote most of the history of what we have of this period that still survives, comes from Saint Bede, who was in the kingdom of Northumbria, which is where half of my family is from. And in particular, a place called Jarrow, which is basically a village near Newcastle, which is the largest city of that area. And Bede was like a parish priest and a roaming monastic priest of this town of Jarrow, where my granddad lives. And one Easter, I went to.
Sorry, I just gotta pause for a minute and saying that your granddad is in a town that dates back. As an American, that's just wild to think about. Living in a town that goes back that far.
Yeah, well, I said, Bath is my most favorite city in this country, and I go there all the time. Like, most weeks I could visit Bath, and that was made by the Romans. It's 2,000 years old. Like, it's amazing.
It's insane to think about. Yeah. All the American listeners I have listening right now, think of the oldest place you've been in America. Doesn't even come close.
Yeah, probably not.
Doesn't come close at all. It's just that. Imagine that being in a town that dates back that. Oh, I can't even imagine.
And I'm pretty sure it was around about the time that I could be completely wrong on this, so forgive me if I am, but I think the first time that humans arrived in North America is when we were building Stonehenge. And I do know that the Native Americans built like some amazing like cities and structures which failed to survive to the point when the Europeans came. So it's not to say that they can't build anything, but whatever they did build doesn't stand. But we have these stones older than the pyramids. It's wild. Well, on the topic of Venerable Saint Bede, then in Jarrow. So this granddad of mine that lives in Jarrow, outside of Newcastle, he is the only other Catholic, like still practicing Catholic in my family. My mom was baptized and went to Catholic school, and my brother was baptized and went to Catholic school. They're not Catholic. At least, sorry, they're not practicing. I, as a teenager, was an absolute edgelord, fedora tipping Hitchens nerd, and absolutely refused to go to Catholic school like my brother did. And I went to an absolutely terrible shit government school instead, and then became Catholic. So what a total waste that was. But anyway, because of that, this granddad of mine, he's the only still practicing Catholic in my family, and we thought we were going to lose him last year. He was told he had 6 months left to live, and it's been 2 years, and he's just decided he's not going to die. So he's still going. And we went up to go to mass with him at Easter, because I thought, like, I only have a very small link to Ireland in my family, but when I think about it, that link I've got through, like, my great uncle will go back to the very beginnings of Catholicism in Ireland. And if I hadn't converted, and will be going to raise my kids in the church, that entire link could have been severed. But because I converted at the time that my granddad is alive, this Catholic link of my family tree is yet to be broken, and I think that is amazing. And I got to go to Easter Mass with him at this church in Jarrow, and afterwards we went for tea and cakes with all the old people of the parish, which was absolutely lovely. But we started speaking to one guy who was probably 85 or so. I just asked him what he did. He said, professionally, I've been a photographer for most of my working life, but these days I'm a historian. And we thought, 85 years old, that's pretty good. What do you write about? They said the entire history of the Northeast. He's published about 35 books.
Wow.
And most of them dealing with St. Bede's involvement in this area of Jarrow, this village that my granddad lives in. And he's written books and books and books about the history of the church in this area, going back to St. Bede.
That is so
just
cool.
Amazing. Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. And so, as I was saying, this period of time, the wealth of culture and literary prestige from, again, particularly the monasteries, of course, the monastery of Lindisfarne, sort of like off the coast of Jarrow, was particularly productive. But then, when you talk about Lindisfarne, most people with the knowledge of the history know we're going to start talking about the Vikings next. Because Lindisfarne wasn't the first place raided by the Vikings, but it was the first, like, proper significant raid where it was clear this was getting out of hand, and it was going to be a very, very significant occurrence. I'm pretty sure Lindisfarne then occurred in 793 AD. So we've looked at a good 250 years of a Christian Anglo-Saxon country with basically no foreign invasions, no massive plagues, no serious existential threats. And so they, again, this is why I say they managed to be a land of warrior poets. It was an amazing period that we know that it's nowhere near as appreciated enough as it should be for what it was. And that's why I harp on about it. And then, so yes, Lindisfarne got hit with a massive Viking raid. And after that, these raids then continued, particularly in Northumbria, which, as you can imagine, is in the north around this area, until you get to 865. So we're talking about 70 years after the raid on Lindisfarne. These raids have just been constantly occurring along the coasts, when the Great Heathen Army arrives, which was an alliance of multiple Scandinavian kings and dukes, famous ones such as 𝕮𝖆𝖆 and why the name? I should have written these down. Yeah, plenty of Guthrum as well. He's the one that caused Alfred the Great a massive headache. And one thing before I continue on with the history, I love to say is that when someone thinks of the greatest warriors that have ever existed throughout human history, you think Spartans, Romans, Vikings. But then I ask, wouldn't the people who defeated the Vikings be better warriors than the Vikings? Why do the Anglo-Saxons not sit at the top of that list? I don't understand. We beat them. That's quite significant. The Vikings lost to us. So doesn't that tell you
the
something?
use of "we" in that sentence is incredible. by the way. That's one thing I love talking about, like European history with Europeans, because when they use "we beat them," it's like, yeah, I love that. I love that like connection and patriotism you have when you're like, yeah, no, we won. Like my ancestors beat their asses. We won. It's incredible.
I am a living connection to these people from 1,300 years ago that did these things, and I try and take that extremely seriously.
You should.
It's why I took the name 𝕮𝖊𝖆𝖆𝖆, an Anglo-Saxon saint who converted the pagans in Mercia. It matters intensely to continue a living tradition of your people who've been here for so long. Okay. Where was I? So the Vikings with this great heathen army, they really did start to just steamroll the Anglo-Saxons for quite a long time. I think it's a valid theory to say that because they were so isolated from significant existential threats, they did have, again, warrior poets and the stories of Beowulf, but it was still, it had more of that like Celtic warrior spirit about it of, don't bother with tactics. Just be the bravest person on the battlefield and throw yourself into the most danger possible. And then they all die when they come up against the shield wall of Vikings and go, oh, maybe we need to think about this a bit differently. But that took a while. And the Vikings continued to just to win for a long time. The big turning point there was called the Battle of Hoxne, which was in East Anglia, which is in 869 AD, and that's really where the 6 out of the 7 kingdoms began to fall like dominoes to the Vikings. What the Vikings tended to do is basically just make the Anglo-Saxon kings submit to their rule. They didn't try and replace them so much, which I do find quite interesting, but they set up an area called the Danelaw, because these Vikings were all Danish, which was basically most of the east of England, where they set up as like their own country. And all the kings, apart from the King of Wessex, throughout the rest of the kingdom, paid tribute to these particular kings and dukes of the Vikings. And this payment was known as the Danegeld. And I say that because you might still hear as a turn of phrase, paying the Danegeld. It's kind of like paying the mafia protection fees. If you pay them for protection against them, like if you want to be protected from us, don't you? Pay the money, or we'll come around and Louis will break your kneecaps.
So the Vikings were a very early mafia. This rolling up, killing people, and saying, "Now pay us not to kill you." I kind of respect that. I gotta respect that. I gotta respect that. That's
well, that was exactly it. It was literally pay us or we'll kill you. And
like showing up in some foreign land, killing a bunch of people. Go, okay, we're gonna stop now, and you're gonna pay us to stop and not do it again. Yeah. That's kind of baller.
Just like the mafia, though, and how those protection rackets function, we always imagine it will be the payments start getting bigger and bigger every time, and the threats start getting worse and worse every time. And so the phrase "paying the Danegeld," at least in like a very educated circles here, still means like, a Faustian bargain, essentially. So like, do you really want to pay the Danegeld and do that? Because when it comes back around to bite you, it's going to be a problem. And one king in particular, or at least I should say one kingdom, but then eventually one kingdom of Wessex and Alfred the Great, saw this for what it was, saw that you can't, well, I mean, you could look at it almost like appeasement. You can't appease the Vikings. Paying this fee only grants you a certain period of your neck not being severed from your shoulders and not much else. That's the most grace you're given. And Alfred, he is the only English king. So this is before England was a single kingdom. So even when you had these 7 kingdoms and then all of the united monarchy that came after him, no other monarch has had the title the Great of this land. He deserves
it. Really?
Yes, there's not been another.
I'm running through a list of like kings in my head, and there isn't one. You're right. Wow.
Yeah. You've got like Russian Catherine the Great. You've got Frederick the Great from Germany. Charlemagne, I think, is also known as the Great, but there's only one English monarch that's ever existed to have the great, and it's Alfred, and he bloody well deserves it. So he was the king of Wessex, which, well, was west of Sussex. It's again, it's around the area of Wiltshire. This is why I keep bringing it back to. I just love how this tiny little farmer county, every period of English history, it's been indisposable. The capital of Wessex was a town called Winchester. I think in Old English it's Winseaster. I was going to go with that. Oh yeah, that's in the county of Hampshire, and I'm going to go there on Monday. I've not been there before. Cool. I've got the day off. Oh, sorry, no, Tuesday. And they've got an amazing statue of Alfred just in the town square. It's huge, and he's holding up a sword upside down, so it's like a crucifix. It's fucking awesome. Awesome. I know. Yeah, I'll send you the photo when I go on Tuesday.
Please.
He was an incredibly intelligent man, and he wrote so much. He was basically a king and a monk and a knight all wrapped up in one. He was a fantastic theologian and such a personally pious man. I don't know why on earth he's not been made a saint.
That's what's so great about European history is you get these figures like Alfred the Great, Duke Godfrey of Bouillon, King St. Louis, who you get these kings who are like great warriors, great kings, scholars, theologians. They were just like, I'm going to be great at all of it. I want to be great.
Yeah. They are. I think they embody the true greatness that is only possible in monarchy, in that if you are raised from the moment you're born to be nothing but a great man and not have to worry about, the daily troubles of the commoner, the heights to which you can achieve in personal greatness and even holiness are incredible. Men like him are the absolute gold medals of monarchy and what it can achieve in terms of personal achievement. He also the tradition of English common law, which is perhaps the most significant thing that's ever come out of England to affect the whole world entirely, starts with Alfred. He was the first person to essentially codify all of the local laws and customs of the land, but also basically he was an integralist essentially. He started his first 10 laws in what's called the Dombock, which is just Old English for the Book of Laws. The first 10 are, of course, the 10 Commandments, and the rest of it, the rest of it's some quite interesting stuff that you go like, oh yeah, this is law written for country bumpkins. I think like it deals with if a tree falls over and covers a road, and it falls from one farmer's land across the public road and hits another farmer's land, who has to pay who, and who has to like clean the mess up and stuff like that. It's a codified set of laws for the whole land to assent to, and it was a really good go at it. Like it really considered the essence of justice. This was all him single-handedly. He was truly a great man. And he is the one who realized you can't keep paying the Vikings for short-term protection, because how the hell do you get out of that vicious spiral once you enter it? And also put the thought into, okay, how do we actually defeat the Vikings? How does this land of 7 kings who are constantly trying to underhand each other and take a little bit of each other's land and all hate each other, how do we actually put that sort of stuff aside and fix this existential threat? And he managed it. He was not so much a military leader himself. Like, he was present at many of the battles, the famous one being the Battle of Edington, that was the turning point in the other direction, where the forces of Wessex and I think lots of Mercian soldiers as well beat Earl Guthrum of the Vikings at the Battle of Edington, and really that was like the turning point for all of the Viking expedition. And it was basically Alfred single-handedly who turned it around. And it is also, I think, interesting to look at the effects that the Vikings had on our neighbours too, because they didn't just raid England. they did a hell of a lot of work in France and in Ireland as well. Famously, Dublin was created by the Vikings as a port for trading slaves.
Wait, really?
Yep.
Dublin was made by Viking. Wow.
Yeah, it was a Viking settlement. For the sale and transport of slaves that they captured on their travels. And the Vikings also raided Paris. I think that might have been after they'd basically been defeated in England, and would famously come to inhabit that little place on the north coast of France called Normandy, named after them being Normans, aka Northmen. But yeah, a truly fascinating point in history. Excuse me, sorry, I've just started to go all bunged up.
Oh, good. So Alfred's a good. I will say I absolutely love the Alfred the Great is another great example of a great how history is just the biographies of great men. When it comes to like the common law, when it comes to getting rid of the Vikings, it's Alfred the Great set a tone that persisted, and that's really what that's how I determine that someone's a great man. Did what they do persist throughout the histories, throughout history. This is why I argue Napoleon is a great man because of the Napoleonic Code. But
I thought you were going to say wasn't a great man.
No,
I would say what he did hasn't persisted.
I think the Napoleonic Code has persisted pretty well.
That's true.
Still used in many laws today. I think his advancements on military technique and battle strategy with the squares. I can't remember what they called it, but they had the square set up where they had the cannons on each of the corners of the square, and the square could move around. I think Napoleon's a great man of history. I would argue that one pretty hard. But also, I'm a huge Napoleon fanboy because he had the greatest quote about dealing with rioters. It's like, rioters think themselves invincible. Kill a few of them, and the fun ends, and they all go home. Yep. I
can hear that coming out of his mouth.
The first man to ever fire cannons on a civilian population.
Yeah. Wow.
Beautiful. That's a French conversation. Let's get back to English history.
Sure.
So after the Vikings leave and go to Normandy, what happens next?
Well, you then get the period known as the Wessex hegemony, and you can imagine where that comes from. After the largest kingdom in the Heptarchy was Mercia in terms of wealth and power, and also just sheer land. And they'd always been great. Well, ever since the Kingdom of Wessex became so punching above its weight in terms of size, they were the main rivalry on the continent, and that did come to.
What were these? What was it called again when there was 7 kings? What was it called?
Heptarchy.
Heptarchy. I'm just looking up a map of the times. I want to get a sense of the different.
I have the map of the Heptarchy just like etched into my brain because I say that is the minimum like a political solution that I will accept for us to be back in like a natural state of affairs and with the natural order is 7 kingdoms on this island. We should not be 1 kingdom.
So you want to go back to what did yarvin call it? Patchwork.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, no, exactly. That's right. The Heptarchy was a patchwork of England.
I'm looking at it now.
I love it for that.
Mercia was really just surrounded.
Yes.
Look at this map here. Wow.
It means the middle land because, of course, it's in the middle. And where I grew up in the West Midlands is the heart of Mercia. It's an amazing place in its own right. I love I like modern day. I absolutely love Wessex. I absolutely love Mercia. I love Northumbria, it's great to categorize them into these things because they still do have local characteristics. The Geordie accent in the northeast where Northumbria is incredibly iconic and unique. The Brummie accent in Mercia is disgusting. It's horrible. It's the Peaky Blinders accent from like Birmingham and the Black Country. Sadly, the rest of the place is great though.
I gotta say, I love looking at the map. Is Wessex, is Wales, and then there's West Wales right next to Wessex.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, if you look at the map, right in the bottom left here, it says West Wales, right next to Wessex. So I'm looking at the map from Wikipedia, so I don't know how accurate the sources is, but
that might be how they referred to Devon and Cornwall. Yeah, I've got the same map here where it says West Wales. That's Cornwall, and consider the fact that Wales means foreigner to the Anglo-Saxons. That seems very likely that's what they would have called it.
Wow.
And
okay, so
I'm just
no, please continue. We're at almost an hour and a half here, so let's continue.
Oh, gosh, this is going to be so long.
It is. It's going to be a long stream, which is fine.
I hope you're expecting that.
I was.
You have me on to talk about all of English history. It's not going to be
sat down expecting a 3-hour stream, but I'm fine with going longer if it needs to.
I think we're on track for 3 hours. Okay. So after Alfred turns the tide on the Vikings, he settles this rivalry with Mercia, and the House of Wessex comes to be like the most uncontested power in the land, because essentially all the other kingdoms, like Northumbria, was the most powerful for quite a long time, until they got annihilated by the Vikings, because they're the furthest north, they're the closest to Scandinavia. The Vikings destroyed their power. All of East Anglia fell very quickly to the Vikings. So only Mercia and Wessex still had power, essentially, after the Vikings had been able to be pushed back. And that meant they only had to focus on each other. And I don't know the exact political machinations that occurred to it, but Wessex won. I think it was Alfred the Great's son married the Queen of Mercia, and so then they inherited that kingdom. And once Wessex and Mercia were combined, it was just unstoppable for the rest of the kingdoms at that point. And if I've got it, I should have it somewhere here, when exactly it was. I don't think I do. But Athelstan was the name of I think he was the great-grandson of Alfred, who became the first king of England. Again, I don't know when this is. I think this is the mid-900s. And what is amazing as well, I've been to see Athelstan's tomb, which is in Malmesbury Abbey, again in Wiltshire. This tomb, however, was I think it's his tomb, but I don't think his body is there, because I'm pretty sure his body was removed and destroyed in the Reformation. Let's have a look. Yes, I have got the stat here. So we talked about the great tradition of the Anglo-Saxon monasteries. That's where the majority of the culture and the literature was stored. There's a percentage here of how much Anglo-Saxon literature was lost during the dissolution of the monasteries. Would you like to guess what the percentage is?
70%?
More?
80?
Yep. More?
90?
More?
No.
95%.
Holy fuck.
95% of this I can't sing the praises of this culture enough. The culture that defeated the Vikings, who everyone thinks are the best warriors of all time, who established they littered the entire country with monasteries. Well, of course, the medievals did afterwards as well. We only know 5% of what we could do of this entire period of our country because of the Reformation.
I can't even fathom. If you're in the Reformation, right, and you're an Englishman, even though it's Catholic history, it's still your fucking history.
Yeah, of course.
I don't get what on earth possessed them.
Yep.
Is fuck 95?
95%.
Holy shit! I knew it was bad. I knew it was bad. I knew the Reformation was bad. I knew the effects it had on England was also on Britain was also bad for the destruction of monasteries of saints. 95% of wow.
Yeah,
fucking hell.
What was at that time probably the most important period of history that this land had ever known. They destroyed 95%
I'm gonna start saying all the proof for King Arthur being real was destroyed by the Protestants.
Yeah, that's probably true. Actually, did you know Arthur is a Welsh legend?
Really? I basically knew that because I knew during Henry V's and when he was dealing with the Welsh uprising, they kept referencing Merlin and wizards.
Yes,
which is I gotta say that's one. It's a common joke, but it's still a funny joke. You ever watch the show Archer on FX? It's a spy comedy. You ever see that?
Oh yes, I saw it a long time ago.
Okay, there's a bit where they're having to help these rebel terrorists get out of England, and they're singing the IRA, and they're just Welshmen who are mad about England.
That's
like,
pretty
they
funny.
took down a dam and they flooded people's homes and millions died. Well, like 2 people died, and they gave us all money for new homes, but still in England. It's just I love that bit about the different parts of English being like, we're rebels against them, like the Irish, and it's like, no, you're not.
Yeah, it's there's probably something I'd like to talk about at the end, because I do think a lot about like modern Celtic nationalism is not the fact that we are Celts and we're proud of it. It's we're not English and we hate the English mostly because they're racist. It's just a shit-lib movement wrapped up in a Welsh dragon flag.
That is upsettingly sad.
I know it's yeah. Like I said, I love the Scottish people and their history. They're such a fantastic and noble people. But any Scottish 9 out of 10 Scottish nationalists these days, I've been taking the piss out of them for years, because they're not nationalists. They want to join the EU. They want to leave the United Kingdom to join the European Union, and they're just all they give a shit about is green energy and all that bollocks. But okay,
I gotta say, I don't want to bring the podcast down, but it feels like, given the current state of England, of England, all English history kind of has a ring of a tragedy to it, given the current state of affairs, which is tragic.
Yeah. I don't think we're at the top of the pile for that. I think you could even say the story of France is more tragic in modern history than us. And I mean, I can't bring myself to learn about the history of Russia, because I don't just want to depress myself constantly. It feels like there's nothing good about it.
I listened to the podcast the other day about the Russian occupation of communist Poland, and it's just holy shit.
There's just no silver lining, but you can apply that to all of Russian history, all of it. It's just constant misery and suffering.
And it's such a tragedy. I mean, every time I think of Russian history, I always think of the Tsars that were killed by the Marxists.
I knew you were going to say that.
It's just such a tragedy.
Yeah, just imagine an entire history of a land of it's just that on repeat, and that's Russia. And so I do think, like, we have so much to be proud of, and such amazing beauty in our history, and I just think it could always be much worse. So right, the Wessex hegemony over the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. You get the first king of England, and the House of Wessex comes to rule the entire land of England. That's very interesting in of itself, but it's quite short-lived, because the Vikings come back in the form of half Viking Frenchmen known as the Normans. This is what I find quite funny, is if you go to a school as terrible as mine was, like I alluded to earlier, history starts in 1066. Which is just an absolute travesty. We've been talking for an hour and a half about everything that happened before this year, but in most of the common mind, this is when it really starts. We don't learn anything about the Anglo-Saxons. The only thing we know about the Anglo-Saxons is that the Normans beat them, which is just insane. The build up to the invasion of William the Conqueror, or William the Bastard, depending on how you how you view him, is quite interesting. That it heavily involved the church, because the story went on the Normans' part that King Harold, who was the king of England at the time, was crossing the English Channel. Got caught in a storm. His ship was wrecked, and I think they said that William of Normandy himself saved him from the Channel, which is already we're thinking this might not be entirely true. No, sorry, this might be William's. No, this is King Harold's father. I can't remember his name. I think yes. He then swore over holy relics to give the kingdom of England when he dies to the House of Normandy for saving his life, and then goes back home. And the bishops in England say, "What the hell are you talking about? This is a load of absolute rubbish." And the bishops in Normandy and basically all of France say, "No, it's true," and they have a massive squabble. And I think basically the Pope says, "I'm not getting involved in this. Sort it out yourselves." And they do sort it out themselves because, well, the first thing, did you know? So, are you familiar with the Norman invasion in 1066 and what happened at all?
I'm not.
Okay. What a lot of people tend to forget is that in the year of 1066, when William of Normandy was pressing his claim on the English Anglo-Saxon throne, so was the King Harald Hardrada of Norway, who said that he had a rightful claim over the throne due to all of this interrelation within England that occurred during the time of the Dane Law. We did actually have Viking kings at one point. Essentially, there was a King Canute.
King Canute. Yeah,
exactly.
I know about him because he is the main character in Vinland Saga, the anime about Vikings.
Oh, okay. I think they also, as well, I think they call Canute the Great, but I think a lot of people say, we don't class him as an English king. He was he was a Viking king that ruled over England, and there were others too. So there were like Norse kings within England for a little while, and that meant that Harald Hardrada, the king of Norway, was pushing a claim over the English throne too. And Harald Hardrada invaded England before the Normans did in the same year. They got absolutely fucking wrecked. King Harold of Harold Godwinson, that was his name, of House Wessex, going back to Alfred, took the English army up north and met these Norwegians at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, just annihilated them. Like, it's embarrassing. We shan't linger on it because there's not much more to say. They just got fucking nuked, and then they left. And just after they'd won this victory in the north, I think, you know, the pictures of George Bush in the primary school being told about 9/11. I think that Harold Godwinson probably pulled the same sort of face when he was told, "Sir, the Normans have landed on the south coast," just after he's marched his entire army all the way up north. He then took this entire army all the way down to Hastings, which is in Sussex, and where the Normans had landed. I've not written down how long it took them, but it was like record speed. The rate at which they covered this ground, because when they got there, the Normans were still establishing a beachhead. Like, they walked from one end of the country all the way to the other before the Normans could, you know, like, build proper fortifications. They were basically still living out of their ships.
I'm picturing two things now. I'm picturing Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli's run across Rohan.
Yeah, basically.
I'm just picturing all these guys just running down England trying to get there. And I'm
pretty much
at the beachhead. I imagine the battle of I think it was the battle of Thermopylae, where the not Thermopylae,
Marathon. What's the one, I think of?
What's the one when the Athenians fought off the Persians on the beach? That's Thermopylae, or was that?
I think it's Marathon.
Marathon. Yeah, I think that's Marathon. I always get those two confused. I'm imagining that scene from the 300 sequel when they come running over the hill and just start wrecking shit.
That's definitely Marathon. Was the 300 sequel started with Marathon? Yeah, terrible film, but yeah.
Hold on now.
Yes, really? Come on. The sequel was terrible. Yeah.
Okay. The sequel is terrible. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, that's what I mean.
The opening scene is pretty great, though.
And I'm pretty sure, from what I remember, that is Marathon.
Okay.
And well, yeah, it's probably not a hell of a lot far off, is it? Because obviously the marathon race came from the runner who ran from the beach back to Athens. So they got a move on in much the similar way. But that means when they arrive to fight the Normans, who we've talked about how prestigious French society was at that time, post Charlemagne, and we've talked about how great fighters the Vikings were. You've then got French Vikings. That's a serious opponent to go up against, and you could imagine crossing an entire country in a matter of days and then having to fight them, you're going to be a bit tired. So the Battle of Hastings commences, and it's very, very close, despite the absolute exhaustion that this army, who's just defeated another invading army and walked all across the country. As the battle progresses, I'm trying to remember this exactly right. The Normans believe that William is dead, and they believe the battle is lost, and they start to run back to their boats, and the English have basically won, and they break their shield walls, they break their defensive positions and start to run after them. And then the Normans go, oh, wait, there he is. He's alive. Go, oh, William's still alive. We're still in the fight. And they reform while the English army is now, broken and undisciplined and charging, and just turn around on them, take up a really good defensive position against this now, uncontested English force. And that really flips the entire tide. And I think I get the story right there. I think the Normans genuinely believe they've lost. They start to retreat. They realize William's alive and go, oh, wait, hang on, let's keep fighting. And now the English are not in a defensive posture. They end up losing. And the common belief is Harold Godwinson himself on horseback charging gets hit in the eye with an arrow and dies instantly, which is what a way to go for such a ferocious king who's literally just gotten done beating the last Viking invasion of the country. That leaves, after that, William has absolutely no contest in England. It's a thorough ultimate victory at Hastings. Didn't even need to negotiate with the king because he's dead. Just takes the throne. And this is a very, very tumultuous period that doesn't get talked about a lot, because it was very simple. It went Harold Godwinson's king 1 minute, William's king the next. But William's reign itself was a massively turbulent time, as you'd imagine, but nobody talks about it, which I find strange. There's something known as the harrowing of the North. It's a lot like the harrowing of hell, in that William the Conqueror just turned the entire north of England into a hellscape. The barons there started to revolt and said, "You're not our king. We're not having this." And the Normans just turned the entire north of the country into ash. Essentially, they killed thousands of people, just like wholesale slaughter. Fortify their hold on the country. I don't think anyone ever tried rebelling against the Normans again after that, because they just did such a thorough job of decimating the entire region.
It's brutal, but that's how you win some. That's how you. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a friend of a friend who's a Vietnam vet, and he goes, "The only way you win a war was you kill enough of them. They just go, we're tired of dying. We're tired of burying our sons." It's brutal. But there's what's his name? I can't remember his name, but there's an American general who gave a speech to Russia, China, and other countries, and he said, "If you mess with us, if you engage with us, if you start a problem, I guarantee you someone else will raise your sons and daughters." Which is a brutal fucking line. But that's
something Genghis Khan would say.
Yeah, but it's kind of true, in a sense. That is how you. Wars end all different ways, but if you really want to finally end the conflict, you can say, "Oh, we're tired of having to have someone else raise our kids," or people say, "I'm tired of burying my kids."
Yeah, I would say. Well, also, if you want to subjugate a people, that is how you do it. You completely and utterly break their morale, and that's what the Normans did. I guess it was, you combine the efficiency of a French knight with the ferocity of a Viking, and that's just what you're going to have if they take over a hostile kingdom. Exactly.
Yeah, that's a dangerous combo.
Yeah, put them as a ruler in a land that's hostile to them, and that hostile land will quickly fuck around and find out. And that is essentially what happened. The Anglo-Saxons just again completely unseated from the throne, not from the entirety of power and aristocracy, but mostly. The Normans were famous builders. they built so many castles all around the country to just create fortifications against the English. You also get the period that I think I've put bulges questions at the end of my notes, but you want to know about the anarchy, and that's this period after William. I think it was William. Let me get this right. William's grandson Stephen didn't have any sons, and well, the Normans as well were fucking ruthless political bastards. Basically, as soon as William leaves Normandy to go to England, all of his children back in Normandy start fighting each other to basically like rule over what they have in France, and then that just expands over to fucking England after William dies. They are constantly, bitterly fighting each other for land and titles, and the anarchy. It's not actually as cool as it sounds, because it was basically just a period of civil war. It's just called the anarchy because it was a chaotic time. That was this heavily involved Sussex, because Sussex is just the other side of the water from Normandy. The claimant Empress Matilda and another claimant, I think it was a Henry, were rival claims for the throne. And I've written about the town Arundel in Sussex, because I think it's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been on earth.
What's it called again?
Arundel, Arundel.
So it's not spelled the same, but I have to say, isn't the same name of the kingdom that's in Frozen?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. You should read my article about Arundel, because Arundel, it has a huge castle there. It's one of the few castles that is still lived in by the Duke that owns it, and the Duke, even though it's nowhere near Norfolk, but he's called the Duke of Norfolk. He is basically the descendant of the one noble house that never stopped being Catholic ever. The Duchy of Norfolk were the aristocratic recusant family. When everyone else became Protestant, they hauled up in Arundel Castle right on the coast, resisted every single thing they threw at them.
Definitely when we get into later, I want to talk about the Rusicans, and specifically in reference to Shakespeare. That's going to be a question for later.
That'll be a controversial one.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so the period of the anarchy then. Matilda, based out of Arundel Castle in Sussex, ends up controlling half of the southern half of the country, and Henry has the northern half. And it's not particularly exciting, because that's, again, it's called the anarchy, so everyone's like, "Ooh, what happened there?" But it was just that. It was just Matilda and Henry fighting each other, and they came to I'm pretty sure it might have been the Pope, or it was at least the Archbishop of Canterbury, just after like a decade of these two fighting each other, said, "This is ridiculous. Sit down. We're going to figure this out." And they worked out a compromise. And
my favorite thing in European history is when bishops and popes just go, "Okay, enough." It's like moms when kids are fighting, like, "Enough. Sit down. Talk it out. We're done. We're done." Yeah. I love that. That is the diplomatic power. Because really, Tom Woods writes about this in the How the Catholic Church Built in Civilizations. Like, the Vatican basically operated international law. They were just like, everyone respected the bishops, everyone respected the church, everyone respected the Pope, and like they operated international law, and we're like, no, you're done fighting. We're going to solve this now.
Yeah, it's utterly ridiculous that Protestants at the time of the Reformation, and even still like English nationalist Anglican Protestants today, say that at least at the time when the Vatican States existed, and the Pope was also a secular ruler of the Vatican States, he had no lawful jurisdiction over England because he was a rival foreign power. That is just bullshit when you look at how thoroughly neutral the high clergy always were whenever they got involved in matter of secular politics. They were just completely neutral. And of course, the Pope was neutral when he wouldn't let Henry get annulled, but he didn't like that neutrality, so they just made up all this bullshit about it. But there we are. That's the anarchy, and that is sort of like you can think of it as the end of the Norman period, because you start to, well, kind of. It leads into a time known as the Angevin Empire, a very French name, but that is because these Norman descendants of William had land and titles both in France and the entirety of England. And this is the sort of period that would lead to things like the 100 Years' War, when the House Plantagenet starts pressing claims over the kingdom of France and stuff like that.
I was asking about that. How valid do you think those claims were? Because some people say it was just like a propaganda move to try to justify the war. Do you think those claims are at all valid? Or
no, I don't think they were valid.
I know Henry V believed they were valid. Like, he actually was like, "No, God wants me to be king of France, and if I win these battles, it's because God wants me to win them," which is kind of a Chad move. But
that's what Cromwell said about his battles. And I don't take Cromwell at his word for it. So
no, Cromwell's the worst.
Yeah, but
apparently that was real quick on Cromwell. That was like every time that someone tried to compare Napoleon to Cromwell, he got angry. Which
really,
yeah, which I think is another great side of Napoleon's greatness and Cromwell's terribleness.
That's quite true, actually. Yeah. Well, okay, so between the Norman period and this sort of Plantagenet period is this Angevin Empire, and this is when you get there's lots of tensions between the nobility of the English aristocracy and the monarchs, but also the main reason being that they just weren't English. Like they'd retained their Normanness this whole time. And
that was my question. What language are they speaking? The kings, are they speaking French?
Yes.
So okay. So the English kings who speak French and are descended from French people,
and they didn't speak English at all.
Wow.
They just, because of course they would only speak to the aristocrats, and they made the aristocrats speak French because they could, because they just had such a stranglehold on the country that they never spoke a word of English. And the most famous king from this period is Richard the Lionheart, King of England.
Here we go.
King of the Angevin Empire.
Love that guy.
He was an amazing man. I don't think he ever set foot in England. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure.
I love King Richard the Lionheart because he was so terrible on the battlefield during the Crusades that Muslim women would tell their children that they don't go to bed. Richard the Lionheart will kill them.
Yep.
And then the point that they're retreating, they're trying to leave, and the Muslims roll back up on the swords trying to raid the ships, and he hops off no armor and just rushes from the sea back into the battle. Just what a Chad. What a beautiful king.
Yeah, he was Giga Chad in a crown. Just an unstoppable force of nature. And again, still very intelligent and pious. Like everything we said about Alfred the Great, we could say about Richard too.
Anyone listening wants to hear more about Richard the Lionheart. Raymond Ibrahim has a book called Defenders of the West, where he goes through.
He's so good.
Such a great book. He goes through like 5, or maybe I think it's 5 of the great men of during the period between Muslim and Christian conflict. Duke Godfrey Bouillon, Sir Richard the Lionheart, El Cid, Dracula, Skanderbeg, and King St. Louis. Incredible book. I recommend everyone pick that up.
Yeah,
incredible lineup. Some of the greatest men in Christendom all in one book. You can't beat it. It's incredible.
Yeah, but so within the history of England, Richard the Lionheart isn't very important actually, and most of this Angevin Empire period isn't either, because they're Norman. They're far more focused, not on the development of the country, and all these things that Alfred the Great did, like the creation of common law for the benefit of their subjects. Well, they just didn't care. They weren't they weren't the people of the land that they ruled over. So there's not a whole lot that I could actually say about this period in terms of the monarchy, but things started.
Then I want to say real quick on Richard the Lionheart. I would talk because he's a great king, but he's not really, like you say, probably never stepped foot in England. So I want to comment on his deaths real quick. After all the Crusades and all the battles, he comes back, and there's a small duke, I think, who's trying to rebel, and they roll up.
Right.
and some young lad, probably only like 14 years old, gets a pot shot off and absolutely snipes him. Hits him. Then the thing is, like, someone like, then the chest. King Winston's gonna die. The knights bring the lad up to the king, and the king's like, "Good shot. No one killed this kid. It's fine."
Wow.
And the moment the king dies, the sister hangs the kid.
That's so
like,
Norman.
It is too. He's like, "It's fine. I've lived a good life. I'm ready to die. It's a good shot for the kid. Way to go." And the king says, like, "Hang him. He killed my brother. We're done." It's so Norman, and it's such a sister thing to do too, for a woman to go like, "Nah, I'm ignoring my brother's wishes. I'm just going to kill this kid now."
Yeah, that's the sort of like calculated, unfeeling evil that only an aristocratic woman can do rather than a man.
Yes. It really is wide how great monarchy and aristocracy is for men, and how it does create some really terrible women.
Aristocratic women are nothing like common women. It's wild. Yeah. Okay, so
good ones?
Sorry.
Yeah, like what? What's the Virgin Queen? Which one was that?
Elizabeth I.
Elizabeth I.
She was terrible. She was a terrible queen, and I don't just say that because of my anti-Tudor bias. Maybe we will have to split this up because we're still not even approaching the Tudors yet.
Yeah, I know nothing about the Tudors besides there was a movie or TV show where Henry Cavill was involved. That's all I know.
Oh, it's a fucking terrible show. Don't watch that.
Okay,
I thought you would have known a lot about the Tudors, so I've been very sparse on them.
No, I know nothing about the Tudors.
Okay, maybe we get up to the Tudors and then come back to it then, because I can then pad out my notes on the Tudors more, because I wouldn't do them justice otherwise.
Sounds good.
Okay, so towards this end period of the Angevin Empire, as we start entering the 13th century, I think the 13th century is sort of like the peak of medieval England, like before the Tudor period and the end of the Anglo-Saxon period. The 13th century gets very, very extremely interesting, because this is the time when the Norman aristocrats start losing their land and titles in France and have to actually live in England. And then as they start living there, they start actually caring about the well-being of the place, as you'd expect. And it develops into the Plantagenet dynasty, where I think some of the most famous kings of all of English history are Plantagenet. People like Henry V, who we've already talked about, and Edward I, and more behemoths like that.
I think Henry V was the first English king to actually start. No, it was Henry IV or V, who was the first English king to actually speak English to the people.
Yeah,
which was pretty impressive.
Yeah, no, I think that is right, because I know a bit about Henry II. I think he was the father of Richard, and so at that point, no, they still weren't speaking English. And but there's another very interesting development, because this is when Arthurian legend, which, like I said, the story of King Arthur was a Welsh legend about Welsh kings resisting the invading Anglo-Saxons and the English, essentially. But as the Norman period carries on, literature starts to revive again, and within the vein of Beowulf, you had people picking up the story of King Arthur all throughout England as an amazing story of kingly virtue and chivalry. And this is at the time as well where France is becoming the world capital of chivalry and knighthood and that sort of thing. And that was the
real quick. This is a weird thing I want to bring up, but it's a weird trend in these English fables and stories like Beowulf and like King Arthur, where they Christianize them. I really maybe not Christianized, because like you said, the dates of when Christianity came to England is disputed. But there's in the Beowulf story, like, it's Christianized, because I don't think the Vikings and people at the time were going to be Christians like that. But there's the fact there's an oral story that was later written down, and as the oral tradition grew, it was to people and passed down. It slowly got morphed into more and more of a Christian tale. I think the Christianizing of the English myths is a very interesting thing, You know,
Well,
it's
consider as
weird.
well, we talked about how the Celts were Christian in the 200s before the Anglo-Saxons came. So the Welsh, who came up with the myth of King Arthur around the time of the English invasion, they would have been Christian at that time. Beowulf, I don't know if this is 100% true, but I think it's likely that the Germanic people brought the story of Beowulf with them. It existed within their oral tradition before the migration, so it was pagan. But yeah, I've only read like the first chapter, if you could even call it that, of Beowulf in English, but it is remarkable how much they talk about like the will of God.
Dude,
And,
you gotta pick up Tolkien's translation. It's so good.
I know,
it's
I do.
So good.
Yeah, but I do remember reading it, and they're talking about like how I think Beowulf was made a prince by the will of God Almighty, and that sort of stuff. It's certainly, by the time it's written, a Christian tale.
Yeah, dude, like in the end of it, he's like gets to go to heaven, and it's like, yeah, he's pagan, but God's like, no, you did a good job. Like you like it's kind of point. It's like a very early example of Vatican II's teaching that, like, no, if someone seeks goodness, it's like a very early example of that. Which I love. It's fantastic.
I could just imagine whoever the author was of the particular version that survives going, right, he's a hero of our people, but he was a heathen. How do we end this story? I won't think about it too much. We'll just say he goes to heaven. That let's not open that can of worms.
Incredible.
Yeah, it's I think there's something charming about that, though. I think
it is.
Okay, but as it's very interesting, I think, to look at the retreat of the English monarchy from France into England at the time where France is growing incredibly powerful and they have their chivalric traditions. I don't think it's a coincidence that then the Normans, or the Plantagenets as they are now, the kings of England, start trying to find their own way to integrate into this kingdom, which is now theirs, like almost reluctantly thrust upon them, that now they have to live in England. They actually have to look after this place. They go, oh, fuck's sake, right, fine. What's here that we can use? And people like works of people like Geoffrey of Monmouth, and who is it that wrote the Canterbury Tales? Geoffrey Chaucer. Again, Geoffrey, that's a French name. Chaucer, a French name. But
my dad's name is Geoffrey, so it's weird to think that it's a French name.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, well, Godfrey and Jeff, like Godfrey of Bouillon, it comes from the same sort of name. Richard is Richard. William is Guillaume. These are all very French names that we've just anglicized over the time.
Yeah, like John Calvin. That's another weird one to think about.
Well, yeah, John is Jean.
Yeah, it's a French name. The thing of I think of Calvin as so American. This thing that the guy was French. It's obviously he was French, but it's just weird to think that the most American denomination I think of is Calvinism, and it's French. It's
John Calvin. It's probably pronounced Jean Calvin.
Yeah,
crazy. Or Calvin, I suppose. But anyway, so as I'm alluding to, this is the period where the House Plantagenet, again a very French name, starts to they're forced to become English almost, and they really embody the story of King Arthur as the pinnacle of a chivalric noble king and what they should aspire to. It becomes like the as the Normans and the Plantagenets start to morph into the English kings, that becomes their like foundational mythos. The story of Arthurian legend becomes extremely central to the English monarchy's view of themselves as they have to become English again. And I think it is Edward I, I think he comes after Henry V, and Henri is a French name, but Edward is an Anglo-Saxon name. And I think it marks a real turning point in the Plantagenet dynasty when they start taking on English names rather than French. And this is all with the background of the 100 Years' War, which can I jump that far ahead yet? No, I shouldn't.
Because when you get to the 100 Years' War, I'll have things to say as well, because that's actually one of the things I've studied more when it comes to English history. The rest of the stuff, I vaguely know. So.
You'll probably know more about it than I do, because I only really know about the exploits of Henry V, and of course, there's much more to it than that. I think it was Edward III that started it. So we haven't even
The
approached
Black
Edward
Knight.
the First
This
yet.
is a great hero.
Yes, yeah. The Black Prince.
The Black Prince.
Yeah.
Oh, that's.
It's such a shame how he like died in squalor and poverty, because he was just he was just like a quarterback on the battlefield and just ran through anyone that came in his way.
I love that during the very early days of the, right before the 100 Years' War started, when they're still dealing with the Welsh and stuff. The prince, the Black Prince, is leading it, is like probably only like things like 15 years old or something. He's leading these men, and they're getting surrounded, and they're like, they wanted the king, like, king, your son, he's in danger. He's like, let the boy earn his spurs. Was the word.
Yes. Yeah,
I'm like, that's so
that
cool.
famous quote. Yeah.
So good. And the fact that
said that about his young kid.
We'll have to wait till we get into that, because I want to get into the longbow and the creation of that. How that was, how that changed everything.
Cool.
We'll have to wait to get to that.
Yes. Well, I think that will basically be the end of it, according to my notes for this period. So before we get there, we have to talk about the Magna Carta, because that sits in between the time of Geoffrey of Monmouth and the rise of Arthurian legend and the 100 Years' War. So this occurred during the 13th century, and it's why I view this as like the pinnacle of medieval England. So I think it is truly fascinating. The Magna Carta was, of course, extremely important to the American founding fathers, and they, like we discussed when I talked about constitutional law in regards to the monarchy during the English Civil War. A lot of people like to say that the Magna Carta is a constitution in and of itself. It's not, and it is certainly not fully franchised like the American Constitution is. There are very specific limits about who is protected by the Magna Carta, and it's essentially the barons. I love this period of history because it's a very we talked about Yarvin's patchwork when talking about the heptarchy. This is also the perfect example of when he says that the way that you sort of like restrict a government is not by decentralizing it at all. It is by doing something like having a monarch whose power is a mutual agreement between him and his immediate lessers, such as the barons of the country. Because King John, I think he is the only John we've had as a king, because his legacy has gone down so badly because of how he handled his reign that no one else has ever been called King John again. And we've had lots of Charleses, Williams, and Henrys, and so forth.
How many King Philips were there in France?
Oh God, wasn't it like well, how many Louis as well? What was there, like 18? And yeah, we've only had one King John because he fucked up so badly.
I love listening to like actual like historians go like, so we're in the period of the Philips now, and they just like it covers like 200 years or something. It's like we're in the Philips now.
Yeah, well, we're in the era of the John. Because so he I think that King John is not as bad as history tells it because he lost. And I think that the barons who succeeded him, they've written history in a very Machiavellian way. They had to paint him as the great villain to justify their rebellion, because in English common law, to rebel against your king is like that is the most like chaotic and turbulent thing you can do. And if you don't have an amazingly good reason to do it, you are going to suffer the worst possible consequences if you lose.
That's why so many like during the 100 Years' War, the French really looked down on England as a country of people who committed regicide. Like, oh, they killed the king. What anarchy? What craziness? What stupidity? Like they really looked down on England during the 100 Years' War because of the fact that they this is a land where they killed their kings. It's terrible.
That I do think that's greatly over exaggerated though, because I don't even think John was even killed. Hold on, let me just look this up. I don't think he was. I could be completely wrong. What is interesting though, while I look this up, I was born in Wiltshire, which is why I keep talking about it a lot, but I grew up in Worcestershire, in Mercia, and King John is buried in Worcester Cathedral. His tomb is right at the front of it. And well, Shakespeare wrote a play about King John, and the Royal Shakespeare Company, who are still very faithful to Shakespeare, thankfully, for the most part. I think that they did do that shitty Joan of Arc trans thing, but most of the time they're good. They often do plays of Shakespeare's King John in front of his tomb in the cathedral, and I've still not seen it, which is a massive regret. I'm sorry, I'm literally just going to skip to his death because I want to know if he was executed or not. Where are we?
So while you were looking that up, I want to point out to people listening, we started with Stonehenge. We moved all the way to King John, which was what year was this?
This is the 13th century.
So we've covered a lot of stuff in 2 hours. So if anyone needs to, there's no shame going back and re-listening to this. And then if you have any questions, Google them, because I'm not going to have any answers to give you. But again, there's no shame listening to this one several times through, because we've covered a lot. I'm going to listen to this myself again because we've covered so much stuff in 2 hours.
Yeah, it's been crazy.
It's been fun.
And yeah, we're only 1,000 years after the Romans first got here. Like, we're literally halfway through of recorded history. So
we knew this was going to be a big project. We knew, like, overview of English history. I'm like, this is going to be a big one.
I thought we could do it all in about 2.5 hours, but no way. I don't know why I thought that. So I just looked it up. King John was not executed. He died of dysentery. I think while he was basically prisoner of the barons after having lost.
Now, do we believe that, or given the fact that they kind of wrote history in a Machiavellian way, do we believe he died of dysentery? Or
yeah, I think so. Okay. Because they only really had, you know, a hell of a lot of power after he died. Because it was not their objective to kill him at all. Because, like, again, even the Puritans, like I said, these radical people, they like the barons at this time, they weren't radical, and even the Puritans didn't set out to kill the king in their civil war. I'm surprised to hear that about the French, because it's generally just like an unthinkable thing throughout English history, and the fact that it happened once in the Civil War is just like monumental. To fight against your own king, that level of treachery in English common law is the lowest of the low, and that's again why I say the barons had to have the best of possible reasons even to raise a hand against a bad king.
You know, the French really fell off their high horse during the Revolution.
Well, yeah, exactly.
You know,
yeah, we never got that bad, even when we did kill King Charles.
I don't know, man. I'm going to say 95% loss is almost as bad.
Yeah. Well, sorry. Yeah. Well, that was the Reformation.
Yeah.
Maybe if we did kill a king during Henry VIII's reign, it would have
been better.
Okay. So the story of King John, the way it starts, people like to make it very complicated because, of course, like I say, this is such a huge deal to fight against your own king. There's going to be multitude of reasons, but it seems like it mostly comes down to tax. King John is way pushing his luck in terms of how much he can get away with, because the relation between a monarch and his immediate subjects, the highest levels of aristocracy, it is of mutual benefit, and that is the thing that the modern liberal and democrat does not understand. The monarchs have never been autocrats, because if they try, which King John kind of did, he wasn't really even being that autocratic. He was pushing his luck against many powerful people who swore fealty to him, and he in turn provided stability and protection to. That's the synergistic relation between a king and his barons, and he broke that trust, and so the barons revolted against him. And I don't know much about the details of the actual battles that occurred, but essentially the barons won. They defeated him militarily, and he was deeply unpopular, because you imagine you turn most of your aristocracy against you. You've got to be quite the dick. And again, the English Civil War was mostly not the dick. Yeah, basically. To prove a point, it's called the Barons' War. That's what it's known as, and like if that many barons rebel against you, you've done something really bad. If it can be known as the Barons' War, the majority of them turn against you. Because, like we've said, it was the English Civil War was basically the aristocrats, most of them being royalist, and most of the burgeoning middle class trying to overthrow them. If all of your aristocracy try and fight you, yeah, seriously, you've done something so wrong. So they bring him the Magna Carta, Latin for the Grand Charter, and it is essentially the document that codifies, because we've talked how much about the tradition of English common law is defined law, that it's written in stone. This is the way we do things. That's what the Constitution is. And the Magna Carta it's applying that constitutional framework to the limits of a king's power. Because it was like an unspoken rule, and there's a certain level of elasticity in how much barons can get away with and how much the king can get away with until the other one gets pissed off and does something about it. And so the Magna Carta applied this tradition of writing down your laws and customs and setting them in stone to the king's limits on power. I don't think you need to go into the nitty-gritty on exactly what it established, but it did basically just make land owning men and heads of households sort of like a recognizable political unit. It did extend power a bit more beyond the king and his immediate subjects. The barons and the lords of the manor and things like that, like the gentry, they started to get a bit more political enfranchisement because of this. And that is why a lot of people can massively blow it out of proportion and say that it's something like the American Constitution, which applies to all free men. And then over time, through like Supreme Court rulings, it just now applies to every single person that stands on the soil of America. But the Magna Carta was not that.
They're trying to push it to apply. I saw an article the other day when it was like, why other countries to be able to vote in American elections?
That's exactly what I was alluding to. It's gone past the point.
And to a point, given America is kind of the global empire, I'm like, you know what? If we're going to be a global empire of democracy, I kind of get it, but it's so cringe, you know?
Yeah, but it is exactly what led to the downfall of the Roman Empire. With the extension of citizenship and the reliance on
maybe we should have it happen then.
Yeah, I mean, that's honestly how I think about it sometimes. But it's easy for me saying that this side of the Atlantic.
I'm in Alaska. I'm basically removed myself.
True, yeah. The Kingdom of Alaska would be a great thing to see in our lifetime.
Oh, the Alaskan feudal party, man. We got to get it going.
Jeremy would be king, wouldn't he? He would just...
Dude, Jeremy's mincing running for governor. Like, jokingly said, I might run for governor. And I'm like, dude, say the word. I'm there. What do you need from me?
I'll be his top guy.
Who do I need to kill? I'll go to jail for this. Say the word, Jeremy.
Yeah, he would be a great 5'4" Caesar.
He is like that. He is pretty... I'm not gonna get into that. He is unbelievably short. I was not prepared.
It's all right. He's allowed to be, though.
Yeah, Grant told me I wasn't ready for it. Then I walked into the restaurant and saw him in the kitchen. I'm like, I can barely see him over the counter.
Dear. Okay, so where we were with the Magna Carta then.
Yes.
So King John, thoroughly defeated, signs the Magna Carta. And that seems like it's the end of it. But the big reason why King John is so maligned is he signs it, leaves, and then goes, fuck it, I've changed my mind. Screw you all. I'm going to carry on doing whatever I want to do. And the barons say, okay, fine, we'll have a round 2 if that's what you really want. And just destroyed his army even worse this time. Got him to sign the document again. And I think it is then after he signed this document that he then dies of dysentery. And that's the end of King John. And the Magna Carta is so significantly important because it brings the monarchy into the fold of English common law, which is a big deal in such a profound institution of this country. then after that, so we've only got one period between that and then the War of the Roses / the Tudors, which really are essentially the same thing. So I think the last period to cover is the Black Death and the Peasants' Revolt. This is one I've got much fewer notes on because it's kind of straightforward. It's exactly as you imagine. But the 14th century, I think the Black Death, as it spread across Europe, I think this might be the bubonic plague, but I think that could also be a separate epidemic. But I'm pretty sure it is the Black Death. If you look at its effects across Europe, it's so strange. It's sort of like, I think it appears maybe in like Italy or somewhere in like southern Europe first, and then almost immediately in England. We're a very early contractor of the Black Death, and then it goes through France and then Germany, and somehow skips Poland but makes it to Russia. It's bizarre. Like the geography of the procedure of the Black Death is weird. From what I remember, like Poland was barely touched by
God. Poland has been blessed by God. There's a great book on Pope John Paul II where the opening chapter argues that it's like the reason Pope John Paul II is so great is because Poland is God's favorite country. It's like basically the argument of the opening chapter.
Yeah, well, I saw a map of the world the other day, divided into countries where like either abortion is illegal, it's legal, or it's funded by the government. And I just looked at it and I thought, okay, we need to limit the papacy to Poles, South Americans, and Africans until we figure this shit out. Because what the hell? Why is Italy green on this map?
I think Poland is still technically, like Poland has technically they have a king and queen, and it's Jesus and Mary.
Yeah, that's right.
This is so incredibly awesome.
I don't think it is.
Really?
Because if you want to be based, you can't be a republic. And you essentially are a republic, just saying, "Oh, Christ is like a king," but I think you need.
I'm torn on republics because on one hand they are cringe, but the civic patriotism that republics can generate under, say, Rome and under like Napoleon, I like the aesthetics that can come about from a republic. So I'm torn on the republics.
I think that civic patriotism is the worst possible thing that comes out of it because that's what leads to total war. Because you mentioned
that is what leads to more. I would say leads to a meritocracy of great men, like Napoleon was trying to create. So it's again doesn't always work, but there is arguments for it, I think.
Well,
but that's a different conversation to get into.
Look at the number of deaths that occurred during battle in the Roman period, where you have things like the Battle of Cannae, where I think 40,000 Romans died on one day. And then after the collapse of the Roman Empire, so we talked about earlier the Great Heathen Army when it arrived in England. I think I read a source that said scholars believe the size of the Great Heathen Army was 10,000 people. So a quarter of the amount of men who died in Cannae, and this was the Vikings managing to take over all of England because republics and the civic nationalism that they foster turn every single person in a country into a viable military target.
Okay, that is true. That is. And
I then look at the Second World War. Like you look at the medieval, the period from the collapse of the Roman Empire to Napoleon. Like all of the battles are like a few hundred people died, but in the Roman period with the civil nationalism, it's like there was a border skirmish and 10,000 people died. And then you look at the First World War, and on the first day of the Battle of the Somme, I don't remember how many tens of thousands of men died.
Eric von Kuhnert writes about that in Monarchy and War, that when you started having these democracies or civic republics or that kind of stuff, it turns everyone into a possible threat of, because if like Wasp said, if we are the government, then when you're trying to kill someone, take over for one power, there's a government, then all the people are part of the government, therefore they can be targeted.
Yeah,
but I would say the quote Dominic Sandbrook, prior to the 1700s, all numbers were made up. Which, I don't.
Yeah, they are. However, the numbers I've quoted are modern historic consensus. If you quote from primary sources, then you're just asking for fantasy.
But I would say that is a great line, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
All numbers were made up.
Like I said, I love that podcast, and I love Dominic's way of just like phrasing things like that. Sometimes,
Yeah,
it's almost irreverent, but it's just like, so aloof. Yeah, it's great.
great.
Okay, so the Black Death.
Mhm.
This is a fantastically interesting period because I wrote a lot about this when I studied economics, because the sort of like the purchasing power that the common man inherited if they survived the Black Death was crazy. Is the estimates of how many people died because of the Black Death is 30 to 60% of the population. The majority of them, the commoners, and like aristocrats can haul up in their castles, lock the doors, and survive on their massive grain stores without having to have contact with all the peasants who live with each other and share market spaces together and that sort of thing. So it ran rampant throughout the peasantry. But the thing is, we've already alluded to the required synergy between social classes in a monarchical system, as opposed to, like, the atomizing individualism of a democratic republic. So the peasants need the aristocracy, and the aristocracy need the peasants, and then suddenly half of the peasants die. And it's amazing to look at this in just terms of sheer supply and demand. The aristocrats need the peasants for their taxes and their food, and their manpower if they're ever called to tithe them for war. And they've just lost 50% of them. So the remaining 50% are twice as valuable. And it's a fascinating period in terms of economics, because this is the first time, like basically in European history, that you ever get a middle class. Because the remaining landowners and the, say, like the head of a household who has servants and a family to till the fields, if he's the one controlling the money, he's just got a hell of a lot wealthier, because that food has basically just doubled in price and his economic standing has shot up massively. And there was a certain groups of peasants that could become middle class. They could become merchants because they were dealing so much more in value rather than physical goods. Like, the food that was pulled out of the ground had much more of a monetary value associated with it, as like, this is now worth something. It's more like, I have something you want and you need to make it worth my while for me to give it to you, rather than the other lord from the next town over who's going to pay me more. And it's like the birth of capitalism almost, and a merchant middle class. And this sort of it's also, well, a lot of modern historians love looking at this, because it's a time where there were lots of notable women who filled that role, because the husband died during the Black Death, and there were plenty of women who now owned inns and farms and everything, and they were just like the ladies of the manor rather than the lords of the manor. And the social convention of, particularly like the Anglo-Saxons, were, I love the way that they treated women. It was very, just and on the whole balanced. And then the Normans, being the vicious bastards that they are, like they actually do fit the stereotype that we hear so much today, that everyone born between a certain period just beat the shit out of a woman if she sneezed too loudly. Like, the Normans would actually do that. Basically, they were horrible fuckers. And this was a massive turnaround, when now you had lots of women inheriting lots of wealth because of the tradition of English common law. Women can inherit property if there's no male heir for it to go to. And the whole social dynamic of England is massively flipped by the increased value that the peasants have due to the Black Death. But we can tie a bit of realpolitik elite theory back here now again. As what I love about learning elite theory is that when I go, right, I'm going to learn about a period of history, let's get into it. Right, there's the elite theory. Like, it just jumps out of you, and here it is. We just said there's a burgeoning middle class. These peasants, people from peasant stock, now have value, and they can actually challenge the aristocracy on things. And then all of a sudden, you get the only peasant uprising to ever occur in English history. It's called the Peasants' Revolt. It started in 1381, and it was led by a peasant man called Wat Tyler. There was also a very dodgy heretical priest called John Ball, who was kind of like a proto-Protestant that joined the cause against the clergy, because the clergy were very embedded with aristocracy throughout like all of English history. Even today, actually, you might have seen people are talking about the House of Lords is having its hereditary peers removed. So if you are born a lord, you inherit that title. You are now not allowed in the House of Lords, which is fucked up. I don't want to talk about it because I would get too angry. But for the longest time, Anglican bishops have also been life peers in the House of Lords. So when you have a peasants' revolt, you have an uppity priest as well, with like a sort of proto-Protestantism. And Marxists love this period of time. Libertarians also love this period of time because I think a lot of English libertarians wanted to find our own American Revolution.
So those are signs that this is going to be a terrible ale.
Well, thankfully, it's a terrible failure more than error. It's fascinating to like look at the map. It's there are loads of places all across the country where at once they just revolt, and I think it's just so indicative that of everything that I'm saying, that this is elite theory. This is a new class rising in wealth and power, looking to compete with the establishing order. It's pure elite theory. It springs up all over the place. These newly wealthy merchant people start trying it on, and they lead a rebellion. I think this is against King Richard II, and I love Richard II. We mentioned on the previous podcast how much medieval and Anglo-Saxon art was destroyed during the dissolution of monasteries. Today we've covered the literature, but I probably mentioned the Wilton diptych, which is the best surviving English medieval art piece. It's King Richard II. On one side, the Wilton diptych, Wilton for Wilton, and then diptych, Diptych, meaning a painting of two sides on like a wooden canvas. Have you got it up?
Oh yeah. Oh, it looks nice. It reminds me a lot of like the Byzantine iconography.
Yes, yeah, it's all gold leaf on the back, the backgrounds, and I think it's remarkable because this is quite that king, the one with the crown on the left-hand diptych in the bottom right, that's King Richard II. He became king at a very young age, and again, pointing to elite theory, this peasants' revolt begins basically as soon as he's been coronated, and he's something like 12 at the time. So, a young, weak king comes into power, and then these peasants have got new power, and they think now's the opportunity. It's just by the book elite theory. It's great. Lots of people think that King Richard II was extremely corrupt, and they think that he commissioned this painting of him. Well, he stood with in this diptych, that's St. John the Baptist holding a lamb with his hand on King Richard II's shoulder. John the Baptist was Richard II's basically like chosen patron saint. He's a lot of people. I've heard historians analyze this because it's so thoroughly analyzed because it's the best preserved, highest quality English artwork we have, basically. And they say, he was a megalomaniacal king who thought like he was as good as Jesus, and he was basically a borderline heretic, and he just bought all the clergy to say he was so great. And I think, well, if you stop being like such skeptical, annoying arseholes about this, maybe he actually was really pious. Maybe that's why people said he was really pious. Could it be because he actually was? If you just take away your bias of looking at everyone before the French Revolution was an evil asshole with such terrible intentions and blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
I want to say Chesterton had a great line on this in his short history of England. It's a popular history of England for common folk. And he has a line when he goes, historians today try to write common history for common folk, but it makes the mistake of ignoring common people in history or what common people had to say about history. Which I think is just indicative of what you just said. It was like, yeah, they immediately assume everyone before this time period, before this time period, was this terrible, evil person who beat women, didn't believe in anything, just all this type of stuff. And it's like, yeah, common history of common people should focus on what common people believed back then. It's a good sign. He has a great line about King Arthur. But all historians try and disprove King Arthur, and he goes, if there's 100 fictitious stories about a man, 9 times out of 10, that's good signs the man at least existed.
That's very good.
It's a great line.
I just thought of something else, but I shan't go off a tangent. But basically, I think most oral histories and oral myths that people have preserved throughout the ages, I think 99% of them have at least a solid foundation in truth, and they are simply a way of a people recording their history without writing it down. Simple as that. The other thing is as well with there's a King Edward the Confessor, as he's known. He was known as Edward the Confessor not because he was such a sinner that he confessed loads of sins. No, he confessed all the time because he was extremely pious. We are supposed to confess often. And he was a great Catholic king that was very popular with the clergy. And now all modern historians say, yeah, the English clergy was corrupt and he just paid them all off. So they said he was a confessor, so he sounds good. So maybe he just actually confessed a lot. Is that so fucking hard to believe?
For them, it is.
But yeah, because they just think, he was a king, especially a Catholic king. Well, he must just be an evil, conniving piece of shit. So that's that then. So, well done.
We talk a lot about. All circles talk a lot about the self-insert in modern fiction. What these liberals are write these characters who are just basically self-insert characters. I think we've severely underestimated the amount of self-insert in the history, in the sense that these people are terrible, so they self-insert everyone else to being terrible. I think that's something we even really just also because the internet need to really talk more about. I
think a lot. Well, yeah, it could easily be projection. If I was a king, I'd be an absolute ruthless piece of shit. So that means all kings are ruthless pieces of shit. I don't think so.
The whole power corrupts has been a terrible line that has ruined so many things. Because I 100% reject it. If anything, power purifies. If you're a dick and you get power, you're going to be a dick with power. If you're a good person and you get power, you're going to be a good person with power. I'm gonna be a complete nerd and dork about this, but I'm going to reference a movie, Captain America: The First Avenger. They make that point, and it's a solid point that the serum purifies. And if he's a good person, he's going to be a good person after the serum. It's this power. It's a great allegory for power itself. And I hate referencing a Marvel film, but it actually made a good point.
Well, what I love to do is I love to just if something is like that, I love to describe it as a tool. And a hammer can kill someone or it can build a house. It's entirely down to the person wielding it. And it's this. A lot of people. Pro-2A people will make the exact same argument with a gun, but that is not the only tool that one can possess to do harm to people or to build great things. And power is exactly the same sort of thing. And I remember discussing this like when I was like deep in libertarianism with Bloody Revolutions, another British libertarian co-host of mine on that podcast I did years ago, and we were kind of like just waxing whimsical and saying, do you think we would be anarchists if we didn't live in a time with such terrible politicians? And he and I were just thinking, you know what? Yeah, if we lived in the 1400s and we had like a decent king who cared about our well-being and our barons actually looked after us, if they taxed us a sack of grain every season, would we care that much? And we're like, probably not. It's probably the fact that we're taxed out of our noses by evil paedophiles that makes us hate government. And for that reason, yeah, power is also a tool. It can do terrible things or it can do great things if it's wielded by terrible people or great people.
I wonder, we mentioned Alfred the Great. We mentioned several great people in history. How many people have the title terrible? Because there's Ivan the Terrible. How many people have
Ivan the Terrible? As far as I'm aware, he's got that title because he was so like ruthless, not because he was a horrible person, but like just simply effective in a very martial sense. Yeah, I don't know. There's an English king called Ethelred the Unready, and that's a very unfortunate title to be given. From what I gather, because he was Anglo-Saxon, it comes from an Anglo-Saxon, an Old English word, or Middle English, sorry, that means essentially ill-advised. It doesn't mean that he was personally incompetent. It means that his support network was. And I think that's a very unfortunate twist of history, that the word unready now makes it sound like he was just a bit of an idiot, because it seems like he probably wasn't. But yeah, not all royal titles are particularly good. You could be known as King Athelred the Unready, and that's a shame. And I'm surprised King John doesn't have any sort of suffix after his name. But right, let's get this bit wrapped up, because I mentioned Wat Tyler and his Peasants' Revolt. Yes, it was, again, what's fantastic in terms of elite theory is this was essentially a disorganized majority, and the king and his barons who were putting this rebellion down were an organized minority. And the revolt did quite well when it was just ransacking the odd lord's lands, and just, burning a few things down and causing a bit of chaos. But then they marched on London, and they reached a place in London called Smithfield, where the massed peasant disorganized army met, I think it was on the bank of the River Thames, with the Archbishop of Canterbury and I think the king's right-hand man. I can't remember which duke in particular it was. But like I said, bear in mind, the king is like 12 years old at this time. So they meeting with the king's chief advisor, you're basically meeting with the king. But they met with Wat Tyler, and they brought him into, I think, a palace. And the story goes, and this was to meet with the king, they were going to like properly negotiate and settle this. And I think that is likely true. Again, a lot of historians will say that's rubbish. This didn't happen, blah blah. But it's said that when they brought Wat Tyler in, he, again, this is probably exaggerated, but I think it's got an element of truth to it. He grabbed a flagon of wine, downed it in one go, just went like absolutely mental, and just refused to listen to reason. Like, kind of just whenever they said, we'll give you X, Y, or Z if you disband the army, kind of just putting his fingers in his ears, going la 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 la, no 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 no, and eventually lost his temper so much he drew his sword, and before he could lunge for the king, his head was removed, like just like gone. And I think basically after that, his head was presented to the peasants, and that was that. I don't think there was like a great battle or anything. I think they just, the disorganized minority lost its one ringleader, and that was that.
I gotta find the quote now. Hold on, Napoleon quote on. I gotta find a quote for this, because there's a perfect quote for this. Let me find it real quick. Hold on.
Sure. Well, while you are wrapping up, I'll just mention again, modern historians. So Marxists love this period of history because it's called the Peasants' Revolt. What do you know? They love that sort of shit. And it failed spectacularly, which you think they would learn a lesson from. But of course, they all say, no, that probably didn't really happen. The powerful made this up to say that he was aggressive when he probably wasn't, because they're just all horrible, evil people. But I think that you're a terrible historian if you look at the only written records of something and go, nah, I don't think that's real because it goes against my prejudices. But we just accept that in academia now, which is just disgraceful. Like, just write off all the primary sources of an event because you don't like them. Yeah,
100%. I can't find the quote, so I'm just gonna paraphrase it. But after killing beheading that Watts guy and presenting the head to the people who were rioting, the quote Napoleon: "Rioters think themselves invincible. Kill a few of them, and they all go home."
Yeah. Well, what do you know? When you quoted that earlier, I wasn't even thinking about the Peasants' Revolt, but it's right there.
It is honestly one of my favorite Napoleon lines, because it's 100% true. And I mean, I even saw, this is a bit of a tangent, but I saw it in action back in Florida during the George Floyd riots in Lakeland. There was a George Floyd protest set up in Lakeland, and the sheriff grade Judd, who does not play, he once in a news interview said, "Don't rob people here because all citizens own guns. They will shoot you and I won't prosecute them."
Oh, fantastic.
Like, he's badass. He set up so he said a police and a water cannon on like right across from the protesters. And the moment one of them stepped in the traffic to block traffic, he hosed them all with the water cannon and sent them all home. Like, you're done. You can protest peacefully. The moment they try to start any kind of problem, it's just done. Go home. You're done. Just cut it off at the knees like a real Zinwood Chad leader. It was incredible.
Awesome.
So we went for 2 hours and 45 minutes. Is there any final things you want to wrap up on before we get to the Tudor period and do that next time?
I would just say that the thing that then segues into the War of the Roses, which comes with the rise of the Tudors, is more of this economic point of how the Black Death affected the economy. Is after like it came with this tumultuous revolution, but now you have for the first time a middle class who can engage in open market activities, and the country as a whole starts to become very wealthy, and the classes start to become more unequal, but all of them becoming wealthier at the same time. It's almost like how capitalism is supposed to work, and it's what make all the liberals fucking shit themselves. Is that not Margaret Thatcher's biggest fan, but I always give her credit where she deserves it. But she made a point in Parliament of saying that Labour are all just absolute cretins because they hate if people are becoming more unequal, even if the people at the very bottom are becoming better off. They hate it, and that fucks me right off. But this is when exactly it was happening. The rich were becoming richer, the poor were becoming richer. Maybe not as quick as of a rate, but it's better for them. And so I think English capitalism for a time was fantastic, and this is truly the start of it. This is when you have a lower class unburdened by things like feudalism and serfdom, and they actually can pursue merit in the market. And the wool trade, which really propelled England's economy heading into the first signs of empire, begins. And we have merchants and traders, and this then later caught on in Europe, but like a couple hundred years later, you had the burgher class, which comes from German, meaning like city folk, and those were the merchant class, who would then also become very wealthy, and they would sit at the table with the barons, and this whole new political class would be opened up. But I think it's funny how the Black Death, killing 60% of the whole country, sort of like it really did rejuvenate the whole political system, and I think it worked very well at this point up until things got out of control with the Tudors.
Well, I have three things I want to say real quick on what you just said. One, Margaret Thatcher, I don't know much about her, but I believe she was the only politician. There was a celebration of like the anniversary of the French Revolution, and she was the only politician who said it was terrible at the event.
Fantastic.
So I kind of respect that. Like, surrounded by other politicians saying, "Oh, it was such a great day for liberty." It was terrible. They killed so many people. Like, he was freaking out about it. Like, it's kind of awesome.
Yeah.
Two, during the Black Death, the king that started the weird chat we talked about earlier when it came to the 100 Years' War invading France, refused to listen to any of his advisors or doctors about isolating and not dealing with people. He went out and he hosted giant parties and hosted carnivals. What are they called? When they have the jousting and the tournaments, what are they called?
That would just be a tournament, I think. Yeah.
Tournament, yeah. Wow, I said it in the name. He hosted a giant tournament, socialized with everybody. Like, he was the kind of guy who would not listen to COVID policy, so I respect that. I had a third saying. I can't remember what it was now, but we covered a long period of English history. This has been very interesting. I look forward to having you on again for another 3-hour stream covering this next half of English history. This has been great.
We haven't even got to the 100 Years' War yet, because in my notes, I don't even have an entry on the 100 Years' War. It goes from the Peasants' Revolt to the War of the Roses. So we're going to have to cover that as well.
I have a lot to say about that, because the invention of the longbow, I argue the invention of the longbow and its use was the first beginning of modern warfare, because it's when it switched from cavalry to projectile based. And I think that's the beginning of modern warfare.
I think I can shake that theory up a bit, but we'll save it for the time.
There were a lot of examples people point to, examples of modern warfare at the beginning of it. But for me, modern warfare is based in it's projectile based. So when projectiles begin mainly being used, it seems reasonable to me to claim that's the beginning of modern warfare.
Well, yeah, okay, fair enough. What I have to say doesn't contradict that. I think it's only a different element.
Okay. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Before we go, we both had all those questions, but we're going to save some of those questions for the second part. I will ask one more of his questions before we go into the final part. Who is the most important English philosopher of all time, and why is it Nick Land?
Yeah.
Now, I would say it's Kevin Bacon, but that's not Kevin Bacon. Francis Bacon.
Francis Bacon, yeah.
Francis Bacon, not Kevin Bacon, but that's
well.
Me.
I would say it depends on what you mean by most important. Do you mean like best with a large impact, or do you mean like had the most effect?
We'll say had most effect. We'll go with that.
It's got to be John Locke.
Yeah. So I got to go with Francis Bacon because I love his system of organizing libraries. I think it's a beautiful system. I think it's the greatest thing he ever did, and I love the fact that Thomas Jefferson adopted it and married his library off of Francis Bacon's.
Right.
So I think that's a great invention, great advancements he made to how you organize libraries.
Fair enough. Even I know that Jefferson had quite the library.
Dude, I saw his library when I went to DC.
Oh wow!
I will say my disdain for Jefferson going through his library. I'm like, there's no way you understood that book, dog. like Thomas More Utopia. There ain't no way you actually grasped what he was talking about, dude. Shut up. Republic dork. Shut up. You didn't know what you were reading. Like he had a collection he clearly didn't understood.
I'm going to tell you about something that is going to make you try and book a flight to England as soon as you can, if you like a library. Look up the Bodleian Library, Bodlean.
Bodlean. Bodleian Library. Home. It's a group of 26 libraries that serve the University of Oxford. I'm seeing images now, and wow.
And well, you know what? I think I've actually thought of a different library, so I'll have to look this up. But there's another. It's either that library or it's a different one in Oxford that I've been to before, where all of the books are written just before the advent of the printing press. So all written essentially by monks. Huge, giant tomes, like covered in leather, all chained to the bookshelf in like super old chains, and there is a booth on the top floor specifically for the monarch. For when he would want to come and read a book, he would come into this library in Oxford, sit in his own private booth, and read one of these ancient tomes, and you can see all of them.
Cool. That's so cool.
You need to come over here, and we'll go to Stonehenge, Bath, and Oxford.
It's I have a plan. Once I get to Europe, I have several things I need to do. One is go to England, see you and Has. And then I'm going to go on a walking tour. I'm going to re-walk the pass Belloc walked and his pass to Rome from nice. So that's going to be fun. But so before we go, I want to go through. I'm doing this now. If we do a live stream, I'm going to go through the live chat and just read off every single one because we don't get to respond to these when we're going. So we're going to just take a second to go through the live chat, respond to anything else said. First, for my sister, this is good stuff. For my other sister, nonsense. Which is great.
I understand it. Is that why didn't she use the yellow emojis? I've just got to ask. What's up with that?
Padre, I don't know how to say his name. On the continent, Catholicism seems to be conversing the force in the face. Definitely correlates with right-wing politics, right? A few European Protestants are all gay and basically atheists.
Mate, just look at the Church of England clergy if you want
this is
that.
Great point Tom Holland made, that Jeremy's also made, that modern day modern-day atheists are basically Protestants.
Yeah.
Which is good point.
Well, you know what is funny is Richard Dawkins acknowledges that. He says, "I am a cultural Anglican." He says, I basically base all of my politics and view on the world on Anglicanism. I just don't believe in God.
Richard Dawkins.
And there's two quotes, two jokes that I love about Anglicans. One is an Anglican preacher knocks on your door, you answer, and they say, "Do you have a moment to talk about nothing in particular?" What was the other one? Oh no, I've forgotten the other one. No. Oh, sorry, no, it's completely gone, but it's funnier than that, and I really like it. But
Well, I'm gonna say,
if I remember, I'll DM you.
in response to that, I'm gonna say one of my favorite Catholic jokes. It's the Dominican order was founded to deal with the heresy of Albigensianism. How many Albigensians have you met? The Jesuit order was founded to deal with Protestants. How many Protestants have you met?
Yeah,
that's a great one.
I always back the Dominicans, so I love that.
Same here. In the Isles and both Americans, the contrary seems to be the case. Plots are more right wing than cast. Do any of you have a say for why that is the case? Thank you for the great stream. Greetings from Poland. Oh, from Poland, nice.
Oh, great.
If I had to say, if I had to say why some right wing casts seem more that when someone says they're Catholic, are they baptized? Yes, and so they are technically Catholic, but are they practicing Catholic? That has a lot to do with it, because you have a lot of people who I would say are like JFK Catholics, who aren't super devout and practicing, and are kind of liberal. The Joe Biden example. Joe Biden, listen, I would tolerate no slander of our Catholic prince Joe Biden. Okay,
the integralist monarch.
I am Joe Biden's biggest supporter. I love Joe Biden. Listen, man, the aesthetics are there. He once said, of course he's Irish, he has family members in jail. What a great line.
That's good. Well, I didn't know he said that.
When he was in Ireland, someone said, are you Irish? And he goes, I'm not currently drunk, so no.
Bloody hell. That's actually really good. Okay.
He has his moments, when someone's like, what kind of ice cream are you eating? Double chocolate, some chip. He told the pro-lifers the march, during the March for Life, the aesthetics of the red background in front of the White House when he gave a speech. He has his moments, last one, some hick was at a council, some public speaking events he gave was heckling Joe Biden, and Joe Biden, instead of engaging, said, listen here, fat, see how many push-ups you can do. That's incredible. Really? He said that. Wow. He called him, listen here, fat, let's see if we can do more push-ups. Like, I can't. He drives the Corvette. I can't hate him. Okay, he's done terrible things. He's possessed by brain worms and demons, but he's done great. Every once in a while, this guardian angel taps him on the shoulder and says, "Say this," and he does it, and it's great. And I can't hate him.
Well, if you want to see someone who had just like amazingly, not particularly good moments, but hilarious ones, look up the things that Prince Philip said over the years. the husband of Queen Elizabeth II, and he would be great on Twitter. That's all I'm saying.
I'll look those up.
Yeah, you should.
Hate Vikings, hate Viking invaders, hate Birmingham's accent, hate Reformation, love Messiah, love Wessex, love me hep hockey. Simple as.
I mean, yeah, I could have written that myself.
This is really great. I wish this kind of information was easier to come by.
Oh, awesome. Well, this just made me wonder, how have I come by most of this information? I'll be honest, I think a good chunk of it, The Rest is History podcast. Again, it's a normie history podcast, but it's...
Yeah, ignore the Hitler and Churchill episodes, but the Conquistador episodes are pretty good.
Yeah. Like Tom Holland is the best value-free historian in modern academia. You can't argue with that. And yeah, people are going to say, oh, but he's not based. But like,
his defense of Christianity and Christendom is incredible, though. Like when he's defending it, he is on top of it. Like he gets it. I'm expecting an Oscar Wilde situation where we'll get a deathbed conversion. I think that'll happen.
Yeah.
But
I think it'll be before then. I think it might be. Before? Yeah, probably around about retirement, when he, even if he doesn't feel like he's constrained by academia, the fact is that he is, and I think he might come to realize that. But well, that's not to say I get all my history from the Rest is History podcast. I just buy as many secondhand books as I can, and I've deliberately thought, like, I am English. I love being English. I fucking love my country so deeply, and our history is so dense. But you can break it down into eras like we have, and I will quite simply just try and find a secondhand book, hopefully written a couple decades ago, about each of these eras, and then read it. And there you go. Once you've read an old book on one of these eras, you have a great understanding of it, and especially a great appreciation, because it was written before the time when all literature was published for the purpose of demoralization.
Yes. That's one thing I wanted to say. Like anyone listening, wherever you're at, try to find local histories. Like I picked up when I was in Bartow, I went to the local library. They had a whole section on local history of Bartow. Devoured it, read all of it. It's a not only is it fun to know things about your town, but the sense of local pride and patriotism that it would develop is incredible. And as someone who's a big fan of Chesterton and Belloc and the whole distributist localist movement, that's what you need.
Yep. And like I've said, I love being English, but I've also said I much more look back at the times of the heptarchy. Like the having local roots and an extended family, which if you rightly believe that society is nothing more than an extension of the family, then you should have a real sense of local identity. I urge people not to get trapped in the liberal modern notion of national patriotism, which, like we said, causes obscene death and destruction, but is also untrue. I try not to well, you know, I'm from particular places and I have particular roots in particular places. I'm not Welsh, I'm not Scottish, therefore I don't call myself British. I call myself English, and I narrow it down even further because those are my people, and the shared history and life that we share together is extremely important to who you are and your future.
Yep. Localism, patchwork, integralism. Those are the three things. Those are the three things.
Yeah.
I really think it was a bit of a side point, but there's been a lot of hatred against Curtis Yarvin recently. And I think everyone who's been there has been a lot of people turning on him. I think they're all gonna have to eat sand. I think we're gonna see Curtis Yarvin. Uncle Yarv is right. We're all gonna owe him an apology. He's winning. He's totally winning. I think
yes, he is absolutely winning. And I think I do remember the last time I saw lots of hatred against him was when he was basically saying that, politically speaking, Roe v. Wade shouldn't have been overturned. And I just think, guys, he's an extremely autistic Jew. Did you expect him to think anything else other in terms of pure, is this going to advance our political agenda in the most efficient way? That's the only way he's going to think about that sort of thing.
Yes, you have to look at Yarvin. I feel like this is the other tangent of mine, but the people who take their views and then map them on, like, how does this guy, person A, correlate to my views? Does he not hit every single point? No, therefore he must be evil or terrible. And it's just like, come on, really? What was I gonna say about that? I had a point. I don't know. It is frustrating. I mean, when it's like, come on, like, no one's gonna be perfect. Like, here's the point. Jacques Maritain is one of my favorite philosophers. He's a liberal. He's a 1940s liberal. I'm gonna say, if you were in Paris in the 1940s or after World War II, you're gonna be a liberal. I'm sorry, if you look at 1960 or something, if you're post World War II France, you're gonna be a liberal. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It is, and his liberalism isn't even that bad. It's like the best version of liberalism you're gonna get. So, fuck off.
Yeah, and I think Yarvin has a great. Well, we as a people have no education in value-free analysis, but I think Yarvin, reading him is a great way to actually start understanding how you're supposed to do that. Like, you'll actually understand that you can read someone who is extremely clever and take the good bits and leave the bad bits. So
absolutely. Yeah. Well, we've gone for 3 hours. Where can people find you at? Where can they subscribe? Where can they listen? And so on, that kind of stuff.
YouTube, 𝕮𝖊𝖆𝖆. What is that the same handle on Twitter? I think it is. And Substack, Letters from Mercia. I write essays on my Substack, which end up being scripts for videos, and I need to start making more videos, but I'm working on it.
Your link tree is in the description for anybody who wants to find and follow him on everything. Is that? It's later tonight. This is live, so later tonight, you guys should be getting the episode, the first episode of the Chester Belloc Hour, where Connor and I read poetry and essays from Chester and Belloc. That'll be a lot of fun. And then tomorrow around 10 my time, so 2 EST, you will get the next episode, David and I's History of Philosophy series, where we'll go into Peter Kreeft's book, Socrates' Children. So that'll be fun. Awesome. I don't know what we have planned after that. Probably more Chester Belloc. Baz's going to come back on again soon, hopefully, to cover the next half of English history. Which we need to do that soon-ish, because the Churchill stuff is very popular right now, and I want to capitalize on that. I'm reading Pat Buchanan's book on Churchill now, and it's incredible.
I should do that. I'll see if I can get that done before we reconvene then.
Wonderful. I gotta say, actually, anyone listening, I'm Gen Z. I'm the oldest member. I'm like an older member of Gen Z.
What year were you born?
98.
I'm 96. So I think I am, from what I've seen, literally the latest possible year to be classed as Gen Z, and I don't feel like it.
No, see, I feel like it half the time. I'm right in between.
Yeah,
it's like
exactly.
I'm the youngest among the millennials and the oldest among the Gen Zers.
Yeah.
But when you're Gen Z does not have a grasp of history. We don't.
No,
not at all.
No.
Like, I was talking to a guy, he didn't know what World War II was. He didn't know what World War II was. And I'm like, but upside, I got to explain why it started from a revisionist standpoint with no pushback.
That's something AA says a lot about as well. Like the reason that boomer truth, thankfully, isn't going to survive the boomers is because like the education has just gone so bad that the next generation actually is a blank slate.
Yes.
And view it that way, and it's whoever's like, willing to grasp it.
Which is why I encourage anyone who has the capacity to do so, make history videos on TikTok. I know it's cringe, but that's where you reach people. And right now, there's a big problem on TikTok is that there are 0 Charles I edits and there are 1 million Cromwell edits. So go and fix this, people. We cannot.
I think that's out of laziness. Well, a point.
TikTok loves Cromwell.
That's crazy. But a point that I have to make is that all of this history we've spoken about both times, I've entirely taught myself. School history in this country, if you're not at a very wealthy private school, it's shit. History starts in 1066. You learn that William Godwinson lost the Battle of Hastings. Then you learn about Henry VIII's wives. Then you learn about Victorian medicine. Then you learn about World War II. And then you learn about Martin Luther King Jr. That's English state history.
Awful. That's fucking awful.
Yeah, all of this I've taught myself. Yes, you're absolutely right. We need to figure out how the next voting block has not even been taught that. So who's going to be the one to teach them their history and therefore their present and their
next
future?
Generation of autodidacts who have self-taught themselves history and philosophy and theology is going to be insane. Like, because of the internet, we're kind of going back to the 20th century intellectuals who knew a little bit of everything.
Yes.
We're kind of going back to that because of the internet and the all the information available. Like, it's really, people are black, but I'm incredibly white about the future. I think Gen Z is going to save us. I really do.
Me too.
I'm a big believer in Gen Z.
Like I was saying, a tool is only an extension of whoever wields it. And I make this point all the time with regarding artificial intelligence and technology and the internet. That is also a tool. And it is a tool which has been welded for some pretty terrible purposes. But that iron grip, it seems like it's the first area where the regime is losing its grip. We can love him or hate him. We can thank Elon Musk for a hell of a lot of that. But also, it opens up amazing opportunities for people like us.
Oh yeah, like did you see someone made an AI movie trailer of using AI video generation software, and they made a trailer for a cyberpunk Lord of the Rings. Like, it's incredible.
I haven't seen that, but I've seen something quite similar where this was actually on Instagram Reels, so like TikTok, but using AI to make a scene from Lord of the Rings like fill your vertical phone screen to like see that like all of the mountains and all of the sky and all of the grass, and you look at that and you just go,
it's awesome.
There's no fundamental reason why that should feel cooler than watching it, in widescreen, but you look at it and you go, that's so beautiful, and it puts a whole new perspective on it. And like you're gonna look at something like that and think that AI is like some sort of like demon trapped in a hard drive. I don't think so.
No, it's a tool. It can be like I use AI song generating software, and I turned several of Belloc's old verses and songs into modern day songs. Like his Sussex drinking song is now available on YouTube. Anyone can go and find and listen to it. It's great.
I'll have to find you. I think it's an AI of Ayn Rand reading the Gospel of Matthew. It's fucking hilarious.
Oh, see, we're gonna win. We're gonna win. All will be well. In the end, we win.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great
this is
tone
going
to
to
wrap
bother
it
me
up
until I
on.
find it, so I'll DM you once I found it.
Please do. This is a great vibe to wrap it up on. Baz, thank you so much for coming on. Again, this has been an absolute blast. I've loved doing it. I look forward to having you on again to cover more history. And when we get finished with the full breakdown, we'll talk about finding a specific window to kind of do a focus breakdown on, because we're going very quickly. So maybe we'll do a focus breakdown, War of the Roses or something, but it'll be a lot of fun.
Okay. Well, I'll just say War of the Roses is not my specialty. You need a proper that period is insane. You need a genuine expert, and even a genuine expert, I think they can't enjoy learning about it. It's not fun to learn about because it's just so insane. But there we are.
I think it's more fun when you have people who have just learned it because then you don't get any of the biases.
I don't think many people do put biases on. Nobody cares about the houses of Lancaster or York anymore. It's just a shit show.
Well, I look forward to learning more about that because I really don't know anything about it. I picked the only topic in besides outside of World War I and World War II. That's like the only window I know about. Like War of the Roses, 100 Years' War, and then there's the 30 Years' War, but I don't know anything about.
I think that was the English had a little bit of an involvement with that, but from what I remember, that's more to do with the Germans and the Swedes and the French.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So this would be again Zinzi, enough about this American history. I really don't know it. And Roman history, but Roman history is just because of the salute.
Yeah.
Anyway, everyone, thanks for listening. Have a good night.
Good night.